Seeing it's 6 p.m., I'd like to call the February 5th, 2020 regular meeting of the Kenai City Council to order. I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening. And if you're able, would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel.
Here.
Councilmember Peterkin.
Here.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Here.
Councilmember Petty.
Here.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Here.
Councilmember Navarre.
Here.
Councilmember Nackstedt.
Here.
Mayor Gabriel, you have quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Council, before we get to agenda approval, I'd like to call your attention to a laydown you should have in front of you with requested revisions to the agenda packet. Action add item D1, resolution number 2020-5, public comments requested by the city clerk. Add item D7, resolution number 2020-07, resolution and memo requested by myself. And move item G6 to the consent agenda, ordinance number 3105-2020, requested by the city clerk. Pleasure, Council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to approve the agenda with requested revisions to the agenda and packet listed by Mayor Gabriel and request unanimous consent.
Second.
Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next, we have the consent agenda. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Nackstedt.
I move for approval of the consent agenda and request unanimous consent.
Second.
Are there any amendments to the consent agenda other than the one we just made with the approval of the agenda? Seeing none, we'll have the clerk read the consent agenda items into the record right now, and when she's finished, you'll have an opportunity to testify them. All items will either be approved or we'll introduce an item to set its public hearing. Clerk, please read the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Tonight on the consent agenda, we have the regular meeting minutes of January 15th, 2020, work session summary from January 15th, 2020. We have bills to be ratified. We have a non-objection to the issuance of a new standard marijuana cultivation facility license for Majestic Gardens. We have a non-objection to the renewal of a liquor license for Main Street Tap and Grill. We have introduction of ordinance 3103-2020, accepting and appropriating a grant from the Alaska State Library for employee travel and training, and a public hearing would be February 19th, 2020. Ordinance number 3104-2020, introduction of that, accepting and appropriating a federal grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services passed through the Alaska State Library for employee travel and training. That one would also have a public hearing on February 19th. And introduction of ordinance number 3105-2020, accepting and appropriating 2 donations from the Totem Tracers and the Friends of the Kenai Community Library for upgrade of library equipment. And that one also would have a public hearing on February 19th. And that is your consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak to any item that's on the agenda? The items that our clerk just read, and they're also denoted with an asterisk on our agenda. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Is there any objection to approval of the consent agenda? Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. So that moves us to item B, scheduled public comments. We have Bill Learman and Brandy Nikolai, Alaska Permanent Capital Management, City of Kenai Permanent Funds 2019 Performance Review and Establishment of 2020 Asset Allocation and Benchmarks. And I'd also like to note we have 10 minutes set aside. They've requested 20 minutes, so if there's no objection from council, we'll grant 20 minutes for their presentation. Seeing no objection, Ms. Nikolai, you have the floor.
Great. Good evening. Thank you for having us here. We have our regular annual report where we take a look at what's happened in the broader financial markets over the course of the year, and then we can look at portfolio performance and how it's positioned, and we'll talk a little bit towards the end about the strategic review process that we go through with management finance director. So with that, I'll take questions along the way, so please feel free to ask. I'm going to start on page 1 where it just says prudent investment management process. you know, we go through this process where we're continually moving back to planning and making sure that we're utilizing reasonable assumptions about forward-looking, long-term risk and return assumptions for this investment portfolio to ensure that it's appropriately positioned to achieve the goals and objectives that are outlined in code. I think this is a very valuable process. We've been doing it since the fund started back in 2008. I do think that there is value in, you know, continually moving through and making sure that portfolio is positioned appropriately for the long term. So you can begin to see, I think, the value in this overall process in this account summary page. The inception, as I mentioned, was back in September 2008, and there's been total deposits of $20.3 million. There's been cumulative withdrawals of $12.1 million, and the market value at the end of December was $29.7 million. So it has been very successful thus far. If we annualize the account return since inception, it would be 8.23% average annual return since inception, or 7.98 net of APCM's investment fees. The allocation is 55% equity and 45% bonds, and the overall fee schedule for APCM services averages out to about 0.17% annualized effective rate. So I'll talk really briefly about what's happened in the financial markets. You can see here from this chart that we broke out what happened in the global stock market over the course of 2019. You can see we had a really strong first quarter, stocks up over 12%. Then things kind of moderated throughout the mid-year, and then we had a great fourth quarter, up almost 9% global stocks. If we indicated below kind of the key market movements that are news that moved the markets, and I think if you went through those, you'd kind of see the themes that we all remember seeing in the news headlines throughout the year. It's China-U.S. trade, it's Brexit, it's Federal Reserve policy or central bank policy. Fortunately, all of those big headline risks that could have an impact on global economic growth turned out to be more positive throughout the year, and that really helped push up risky assets. And we've had really strong returns, not only in the stock market, but in the bond market as well. So you can see on this chart here, the bar chart at the top depicts different asset class returns for the calendar year 2019. So the great news here is that all of them are positive. So that led to the investment portfolio actually achieving its best return so far since inception for the calendar year. We'd like to break out these asset classes by those that are meant to control risk in the portfolio. Those are all of our fixed income assets. You can see U.S. bonds there at 8.7% and international fixed income up 8%. So what happened was interest rates fell throughout the year, and as interest rates fall, the bond prices rise, and that really helped the bond market perform quite well. If we compare that 8% return to kind of what we'd expect over a long-term period, we're more like just over 3% long-term expected return, so you could really see how the bond market performance was quite strong. As we move over into the blue bars, these are our equity asset classes. They're meant, of course, for growth in the portfolio, and you can see that 31.5% was U.S. large company stocks, still the best performer. That's been the kind of the theme since the global financial crisis, and that continued last year. Real assets that we have in the portfolio are meant to help us achieve that inflation objective, are meant to achieve the inflation objective. And you can see commodities up 7% and real estate, commercial real estate and infrastructure keeping pace with equity markets up 20%. So that was just kind of a look at what happened in 2019. I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about what is our outlook for 2020. And as we do our overall assessment of the global economy, we ended up with the title here, On Exciting Trend-Like Economic. So we do expect the global economy and the U.S. economy to still be positive in 2020. That's good news for the stock market, but we do expect more modest returns from the market. We don't expect returns like we saw in 2019. But how do we get to this conclusion that economic growth should remain positive? These 5 points here that you see on the page, global central bank easing. So we have still a lot of monetary policy support throughout the global financial markets. We also have fiscal policy support. Remember, these policies act with a lag, so even fiscal policy that was integrated into the system in 2019 will affect growth in 2020. Inflation expectations are grounded. That's important. So if we look at the market, our investors' inflation expectations, it's still below 2%. And remember, 2% is the major financial central bank's target. So with that, it allows the central banks to continue to provide support as needed. And it's also important, I think, for the equity markets, because with interest rates so very low, kind of the higher prices of the stock market can remain elevated. Diminished trade tensions, we do anticipate that trade won't be as much of a key headline in 2020, but it hasn't gone away. So it's still a risk that's on the table. But we do think just the political capital gain during a presidential election here in the U.S. From trade tensions is just less. So the consumer is healthy based on everything we look at. That's really important for the U.S. economy, as the U.S. economy has about 70% of its growth coming from consumer spending. Consumers have deleveraged since the global financial crisis. Their balance sheets are healthier. That'll be an important part of providing support for the growth. And most recently, the consumer has delivered and helped prop up growth. So if we have that backdrop of supportive financial conditions and positive economic growth, that kind of leads us to portfolio positioning for 2020. Right now, we're remaining neutral, meaning if our target's 55% equity, 45% bonds, we're staying there. That conclusion comes from the fact that we do think that markets could still grind a little bit higher from this particular point as the financial backdrop remains supportive. But when we look at overall valuations, our stock and bond prices relative to underlying fundamental values, they're not particularly cheap. They're a bit elevated or a little bit more expensive. So that leads us to maintain that neutral stance. We're also up in quality. That means we're purchasing some stocks that have stronger balance sheets as well as stronger earnings. And we think that at this point in the cycle, that will be important here, perhaps in the near-term future. And the bond portfolio that Bill's team runs is also more up in quality. I'll pause there for a second to see if you have any questions regarding the broader financial markets. And if not, I'll move into the investment market.
Any questions from council? Seeing none, I guess we can move along.
Great. So this page here is the historical market value. That's the blue area chart in the background. That's the market value of the fund since inception with APCM. The bars that you see at the bottom are the annual account returns that we've actually experienced. And so, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, if we averaged all these returns, 8.23% is the average return since inception. You can see 17.1% was the annual return last year, so really strong year, best that we've experienced, and the portfolio ended at $29.7 million. This picture here depicts where the portfolio was positioned as of the end of December. The strategic benchmark in the middle of the chart and the ranges are actually outlined in code. They're part of the investment policy statement. If you looked at the percent of asset column and compared it to the strategic benchmark numbers there, you'll see that we're really close to strategic benchmark and we're operating within the guidelines that are provided in code. Of course, we're looking at the portfolio kind of from a higher level and just looking at broader asset classes. But of course, if we delved into what we owned inside of the funds that we purchased, we own thousands of different securities, very well diversified portfolio across global equities and fixed income. The market values there are how much we owned in each of those particular asset classes as of the end of December. This is a picture of performance. You can see the blue bars across the page are your actual investment portfolio, and And the orange bar is the strategic benchmark, which is a blend of all of those asset classes that we just reviewed on the prior page and how that particular benchmark did. You can see on a 1-year basis, as I mentioned, the portfolio is up 17.05. The benchmark was up 17.65. Part of that has to do with the fact that the portfolio is positioned up in quality, and as risky assets just all generally rose last year, that higher quality portfolio didn't quite keep pace. The other issue with that relative performance over the 1-year basis had to do with, recall in December 2018, we had a large drop in the equity markets. Our team kind of took some time to assess whether or not we should buy back stocks at that point. The portfolio moved into January, underweight stocks a little bit, and stocks really rose quickly and bounced back in that fall. So that's kind of what happened last year. You can see since inception, 8.23 versus 8.37 benchmark. So keeping pace. So this would get me to my last comments just regarding longer-term strategic planning. Before I go on to this last slide or two, is there any questions about portfolio positioning or performance?
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, I just have a question about definitions. Emerging markets. Which categories of countries would you place in emerging markets? Brazil, Indonesia, China, would they be emerging markets still?
Right. Yes. China is still considered emerging markets. So the large ones, as you mentioned, are Brazil, Russia, India, China would be the largest countries in the emerging index.
Then these would be the only countries that we would consider in the emerging category?
No, those were just the top countries. So thanks for that clarification. Those are top countries, but it's well diversified across many emerging economies.
Any other questions from council? Oh, Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, when you go back to this, our market value, December 31st, 19, what market value, December 31st, 19, and what is it today?
That's the end of the year, right?
Oh, that's today. So what was it a year ago from this? If you don't have it, it's fine.
I don't have it. We might have to follow up. I have the market value as February 4th. I was prepared for
Well,
that.
I was just wanting it like 12 months back, roughly.
Well, just out of curiosity, what is our market value of February 4th?
The 30.9 million, just over 30.
Oh, cracked 30 million, okay.
Wow.
Let's stop now.
And we're all in Tesla, right?
Yes. So I just wanted to highlight some key takeaways from the strategic planning process that we normally go through with finance group in particular. So, APCM doesn't have any recommended changes to the strategic allocation this year. So the process generally goes like this. Our team looks at what's happening in the financial markets, looks at the current pricing within stocks and bonds, and we try to come up with reasonable long-term return and risk assumption for each of those asset classes. We roll that up into your particular portfolio. We run a bunch of scenarios and do a lot of stress testing to say, hey, if we, experience the ups and downs within the markets, are we still going to be able to achieve the goals and objectives that you've laid out for us over the long term? And so as we went through that process and we assessed, other opportunities in the marketplace, other asset classes, we determined we don't have any changes this year. Recall last year we did a whole bunch of work on this process, looking at different spending policies. New spending policies were adopted for the permanent funds account. They both have different spending policies. If we look at those current spending policies and applied them to the portfolio's market value now, that would mean the airport permanent fund would have a distribution of $928,000 for the year. And so we've been talking with Terry, and right now, the code is written for the airport spending policy where we're looking at the market value of the portfolio over the previous 5 years and averaging that to have, look at the average market value and then taking the distribution from that average market value. Now, we did some analysis to say, what if we took away the 5-year average and we just looked at the last year's market value and applied the spending policy? So I'll say I think the key takeaway here is that when you think about spending policies, there's two components to it. There's the spending rate, how much are we going to take out, 4%, 3%, right? And then there's the spending structure. Are we going to average? Are we not going to average? There's all different types of structures. Now, the most important component of those two areas is the actual spending rate. And so because because the spending rate stays intact, even if you don't average, then it would actually allow the airport distribution to be larger this year. So by not averaging, essentially what you would be doing would be allowing the distribution to reflect recent portfolio changes more quickly. And so there may be some proposals brought forth to look at that particular language and make that minor amendment. If that took place, then the distribution for the airport fund would be higher. It would be, let me see, it would be $1,096,931, which is $168,000 higher than what we have displayed here. We also helped to calculate the distribution for the land sale fund, and that's $137,000. When we think about going forward and what the portfolio could potentially experience given its risk and return characteristics, we estimate that 95% of the time the portfolio could have a return of anywhere between -12% to +24%. So that's kind of what we expect 95% of the time, just so that you can get some idea of what the overall variability in returns could be. And if things got really stressful, we could see something like 20% return. And so I think, it's important that we enjoy and we reflect on 2019 returns very strong, but it's also important to highlight what other return distributions we experience. Our return expectations long-term still remain modest relative to history. That's reflective of where interest rates are, where valuations are, and economic growth. So, are there any questions about?
Councilmember Glendenny.
Yeah, just a question about the withdrawal methodology. We're going an average of 5 years now. And so if we said whoopee and be Scrooge McDuck and we got all our money, and then next year and the next year and next year it's not so good, we would probably be in the position of maybe eating our seed corn. Not necessarily.
No.
The amount of growth could be taken away, and we'd have less potential there if we consumed it right away.
No, I think that if we looked at a long-term, picture, both when you average and when you don't average, the amount of money that is distributed from the fund would be really close. What would change is that when the distribution recognizes, the change in portfolio value would be quicker if you didn't average. So that could mean, though, since last year was a really good year and a distribution would be over $1 million, that next year, if the portfolio didn't perform as well, the distribution obviously wouldn't be as large. But over the long term, we estimate that the cumulative distribution amount for both of those policies would be approximately the same.
Yeah, just for budgeting forecasting, if you had the 5-year average, then you could forecast your draw, your take. you'd only have one variable, the fifth year, and then you have the other four are known constants. Just a question.
Correct. So by averaging the portfolio value, you do provide a more stable value in distributions. Again, the downside to that is that when you have a year when the portfolio is up 17%, as we experienced last year, the weighting is only 20%, right? And it kind of moves through. So that does kind of level off the distributions. We see some organizations maintain that average spending calculation if it's important to maintain really stabilized budget.
I see Terry Eubank has his hand up back there. Terry, you want to chime in?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to chime in because I'm the one who's kind of been pushing this with APCM. And what I saw this year when I did my analysis was I saw a year where we had exceptional market returns, 17.1%, which is the highest since inception of this thing. And I saw a situation where our inflation-adjusted principal balance, which is our benchmark of whether we take 3.8 or 4.2, the year-end market value actually exceeded that inflation-adjusted balance by over $500,000. Okay, so we've already well inflation-proofed the fund, and yet we were constrained to a distribution at the lower percentage rate, and that just seemed counterintuitive to me. We have all these positive things, and we're still constrained at the lower distribution rate. So at that point, that's when I engaged with Brandy and Bill and said, well, can we run some analysis and tell me, you know, if we eliminated the 5-year averaging and went to the 12/31 balance, do we still achieve inflation proofing over the life of this? And all projections are that we do. Now, the other issue that I have with the averaging as I started to think through this is that I explained a scenario where we have a large cash injection into this fund. We sell a piece of property to the airports, and I put $3 million into this fund. The inflation-adjusted balance that we measure against at the end of the year would it take into account 100% of that $3 million in year one. But the averaging would only take into account that balance one time. So it's likely for a 5-year window after any sort of significant cash injection into the fund, we're going to be constrained at a 3.8% draw no matter what the market does because we're looking back 5 years and averaging. So, you know, if we're able to achieve inflation proofing, which was our #1 priority, and we're trying to maximize our withdrawals out of the fund to provide operational support to the airport, if we can do that by eliminating the 5-year averaging and eliminating these other problems, I'm kind of in support of that, and I do plan to drop some legislation, probably introduce at the next meeting that will do that. But that's where I am. I wanted to chime in. This was something I definitely was pushing, and that's kind of the reason why.
Thank you, Terry. Councilman Glendinning.
Yeah, just to follow up, yeah, in our budgeting policy, every year we have a page that comes out and it shows a band, upper and lower band, and then we have a trending graph that shows where the particular balance is within the appropriate range of funds that we are to hold. Is this what you're addressing, or am I missing something here?
Well, the band you're talking about that we have is our fund balance policy. It only exists in the general fund, so it's not applicable to these funds. What we measure against here is APCM end year goes back to the start of time of this portfolio, and they do a calculation to determine what, in order to have $1 today worth the same as $1 back then, how much do we have to have today? What's the inflation-adjusted balance that we should have? And that's our barometer in our calculation. And if we're over that, if our 5-year average at this point is over that amount, then we draw at 4.2%. We can take a little bit more money out. If it's below that, we can only take 3.8% out. You know, all I'm asking to do is eliminate the 5-year average and look at the 1-year end balance. So.
Councilman Glendinning.
So then your proposal would allow us to be more agile in our budgeting. Is that what I'm taking away? More reactive?
I think it's going to eliminate some opportunities where, like I said, large cash injections would arbitrarily keep our distributions low for a period of 5 years. You know, I think, like Brandy said, over time, when they ran it both different ways, you know, one is when you get to take the money. So if we keep the 5-year averaging in, we're going to take less money out this year. We're going to take more money out in years 7, 8, 9, 10, or whatever it is. At the end, we take closely the same amount of money. I guess it was just, like I said, counterintuitive to me to have market returns of 17%, have a year-end balance $500,000 over what we need to inflation-proof the fund, and still be constrained to a withdrawal of 3.8%. So I'm more a fan of taking a little bit of money on the front end, and as long as all projections are that we continue to inflation-proof the money.
Thank you.
Councilmember Naxton.
I guess it's really a discussion for another time. I guess it's philosophical when you take the money, and sometimes it's easier to budget if you're what you're getting every year is more like the year before and so forth. If you have high years and then next year it's down 17% and then there's an adjustment. I mean, overall it might come out about the same, but year to year it's going to change, I think. But we'll have to have a further discussion on this so we completely understand it.
Any other questions of council? So, did you have, that's your presentation, Brandy? Okay. Okay, okay. You got us hanging, us hanging by a thread here.
Yeah, no, I think that was all we had.
Okay, very good. Is there any questions of Mr. Learman or Ms. Nicolai?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are now on item C, unscheduled public comments. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to address the council on any item that is not on the agenda or consent agenda at this time? Seeing none, we'll move to public hearings. First up, we got D1, ordinance number 3101, 2020, accepting and appropriating a grant from the Rasmussen Foundation for the purchase and installation of security cameras at the city's historical cabins in Old Town, Alaska. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure of council. Councilmember Naxton.
I move to enact ordinance 3101, 2020.
I second that.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to ordinance number 3101-2020? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Discussion, deliberation. Councilmember Naxton.
I'd just like to thank Elizabeth and our planning department for all of her work and getting this grant for the city.
And I'll tag on to that and like to thank the Rasmussen Foundation for providing the grant. Councilmember Glendenny.
Yeah, and thanks to Elizabeth and city administration for procuring this in a most timely manner. We'll be ready for next summer.
Yes. Any other comments from council? Yeah, I think with all the problems we had down there, I think this is definitely going to enhance our, the issues we've had and some of the losses we've incurred. So, Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I just did want to follow up on a comment that I received from council when this was introduced, or in my city manager's report previously. I'm not sure which it was, but the council had requested that we reach out to some of the businesses in the area who had installed similar security cameras, and we have reached out, and we will be incorporating those those conversations into any decisions we make as far as what type of cameras are purchased. Thank you.
Any other discussion, deliberation? Councilmember Peterkin.
If they don't cost as much, can we just use the money to help the cabins out or whatever.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Peterkin. We would have to work with Rasmussen Foundation. You know, when we originally looked at this, there was some discussion about some further improvements at the site, such as lighting, which would help with the cameras specifically. So there is a possibility that we could, but we'd have to work with Rasmussen to make sure that we could expand the grant beyond what we had originally anticipated.
Thank you.
Any further deliberation, comments from council? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Gabriel?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin?
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Yes.
Councilmember Petty?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes.
Councilmember Navar?
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtet?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We're now on item D2, ordinance number 3102-2020, amending Kenai Municipal Code 14.20.280, public hearings and notifications to reduce the newspaper posting requirement. This is brought forward by Councilmember Naxted. Councilmember Naxted.
I move to enact ordinance 3102-2020.
Second?
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to ordinance number 3102-2020? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Councilmember Naxted.
Just kind of explain, this is a very simple ordinance. Currently, our planning and zoning is required to publish in a local newspaper twice the same advertisement of upcoming meetings. And what this does is it reduces that to one publication in a local paper. It also changes a date, and this is kind of more in line with what the council does. It's down to 6 days and not 7 days in advance. This obviously would have a cost savings. It would cut the cost in half. It meets all the state requirements. As a matter of fact, the state requirements aren't even to necessarily to publish in a newspaper, really just to post on a bulletin board along those lines. Planning and zoning at their last meeting did approve, recommended approval of this, and they even suggested that perhaps advertising in the paper isn't necessary. That was part of their discussion. They were wondering if that was necessary, but everybody's pretty well electronically connected and whatnot. And I think this will also help out our planner in if there's anything additional to add to the agenda. It gives her a little bit, or he, an extra day or so to be able to get that into the paper. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Any further? Councilmember Glendenning.
Just housekeeping, looking at the whereases, with about the 8th one down, the recommended blank of ordinance at the January 22nd meeting. Do we have to fill something in there?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yeah, that should be filled in to recommended enactment. So there's a requested amendment.
Yeah, and I believe in the memorandum, there's a request from Ms. Appleby to populate that space with the word inaction.
Should be enactment.
But enactment might be better. So do we have entertain a motion? Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, then just reading from the memorandum, recommend that the city council request a recommendation for ordinance 3102-2020 from the Planning and Zoning Commission at their insert in the whereas recommended enactment at their 22nd, yeah, okay, insert the word enactment in the 8th whereas.
Second.
Discussion on the amendment?
Request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection?
Let's see where the enactment is here. Here we go.
Seeing none, the amendment is approved. Council, we now have before us ordinance number 3102-2020 as amended. Any further discussion? Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. The part of this ordinance that I don't support is changing the publication from 7 to 6 days. And I'll explain why. Councilmember Naxted talked about it being in line with the city council, but planning and zoning has a function that the city council doesn't have, and that's important to having the extra day. And what it is that they act as a quasi-judicial body for items like applications for conditional use permit and things of that nature. And so, you know, when it's open to the public, you know, for public comment, and those who have served on the Planning and Zoning Commission know that they're looking for something more than, for example, testimony from, you know, a landowner that this use that's going to go in my neighborhood would negatively impact my property value. They want to get something else, like maybe an opinion of value from a realtor or something like that. And so that was really why, in the beginning, there was 2 weeks of publication, you know, so that people would have enough time, if they had an issue with a permit, to actually get something to go in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission to testify about. You know, our being in, always in a situation where we have to look at our budget pretty carefully. You know, I get the point of the savings by eliminating one of the publications. But I really think that, you know, we should keep the way it is for 7 days, because one day will make a difference, may make a difference to people in terms of you know, getting information together to go to the hearing. You know, and that's a function that the city council doesn't do. We're all legislative. You know, it's true that if there's an appeal from planning and zoning, it would come to the Board of Adjustment, which is the city council sitting as a Board of Adjustment, where we're functioning like the Planning and Zoning Commission. And we also have, you know, obligation to kind of like, you know, act in that capacity to, for, you know, in the public interest also. So, you know, that being said, I would put my idea on the floor by a simple amendment to the ordinance, and that would be on page 10 of the packet, and the top there, B, where you have the legislative to change from 7 to 6 days. I would move to amend the proposal to leave it as not less than 7 days prior to the date of the hearing. That would be my motion.
Is there a second?
Just a question of the maker. That is just for the, for quasi judicial, or it'd be for all proceedings?
It would be for the agenda for all proceedings, but, so it would apply to every meeting. So we wouldn't change that you get that the public gets 7 days prior notice. What we would change is that there's only one publication of that, not 2.
And that would be 7 instead of 6.
Right. It would leave it as 7 instead of changing it to 6, instead of shortening it up.
Yeah, I'll second.
Discussion on the amendment? Councilmember next.
So I kind of discussed it already.
Yeah.
Ahead of, you know, excuse me, I dropped my pen, ahead of making the motion, but, you know, I'd encourage, you know, the council to support that, you know, again, recognizing the difference in that, significant difference in that function of what the Planning and Zoning Commission regularly does as opposed to what the city council does. Thank you.
Councilmember next, Ed.
I guess then the publication would, rather than be on Wednesday, that's at 7 days, it would be on Thursday in the paper, and then you'd have all day Thursday, and then Friday to get that information in the weekend, and then Monday, Tuesday. And this is something that, you know, I believe the planner had in mind, that kind of maybe work for her a little bit better, a little later, so she can get, if there was something additional to get on the agenda, it gives her an extra day to do that, as opposed to, you know, prior to the Wednesday. So that's the purpose of that, and also, like I said, it does line it with the council, and we're not quasi-judicial, we are, and which is as important. But anyway, that's all I have.
Any further discussion? Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes, thank you. So, you know, a lot of those items that you know, that you're talking about for adding to the agenda, they wouldn't be quasi-judicial, you know, and if there was an issue like a discussion item, they could be added by amendment. You know, again, as you pointed out, a couple of those days are weekend days, Saturday and Sunday, and so, you know, people are generally not doing business then, so you're tightening up the time. I really think it's important for the opportunity of the public for us not to take that day away from them as far as the Planning and Zoning Commission is concerned. And thank you.
I guess I would have a question, since the purpose of this is a cost-saving measure, would changing it from 6 days to 7 days affect the fiscal note? Maybe a question for Ms. Hines, no?
No, it
Oh,
would not.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Currently, we would continue to post 7 days prior, because that's what our current practice is. We wouldn't change practice if it was changed to 6. It's just that this aligns it with what the city council's timing is, but we would continue to post on the same day as we have in the past. So there's no fiscal note associated with this.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the amendment? Councilmember Navarre?
Just real quick, I won't support this. You know, we can always go back if it doesn't work, or if there isn't a benefit at some point, or I know sometimes people ask for a delay, there's holidays, people are out. I think allowing our code to reflect a good opportunity, and like you just heard from the city manager, if it's, they're gonna continue to do the other, but if it's needed, or if there's there is some flexibility where we can hold off one more day and get it, and you never know what the situation might be. As you know, the society is moving, as you heard the planning and zoning talk about, no newspaper at all in some cases. You know, not that you can forget about how it used to be, but there's new methods of communication and that, and to allow 1 day within code, and the fact that the planning and zoning didn't make any recommended changes or have any, matter of fact, they were a little bit more, yeah. So, anyway, I just won't be supporting this amendment. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Peterkin?
Yes.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Yes?
Councilmember Petty?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre?
No.
Councilmember Naxtet?
No?
Mayor Gabriel?
No.
Motion passes.
The city manager pointed out that since we did just amend this, that we'd have to change the second to last whereas in the ordinance.
Sure.
I guess we would just delete it. Would that be correct?
Yeah.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Sure, I would move to delete the 7th whereas.
Second, and request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the second last whereas is deleted, which references the 7 to 6 days prior to the date for public hearing. So we now have ordinance number 3102, 2020 as amended in front of us. Any further discussion from council? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Glendenning?
Yes?
Councilmember Petty?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy?
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre?
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtet?
Yes?
Mayor Gabriel?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin?
Yeah.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Council. We're now on item D3, resolution number 2020-03, authorizing the purchase of real property described as Lot 6B and 10B2, Block 19, and Lots 7D and 7C, Kenai Town Site 2018 edition for the public purpose of including the property in the Bluff Erosion Restoration Project, and determine that public interest will not be served by an appraisal requested by the city administration. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, okay. Let me get back, just left it on. I move we adopt resolution number 2020-03.
Second?
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-03? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Mr. Ostrander, would you like to give a brief overview?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. So this is a resolution that authorizes the purchase of these 4 parcels. They're all a part of a subdivision plat that was just completed towards the end of last year. This is a component of the ongoing effort to acquire all of the property necessary to complete the bluff stabilization project. Actually, if you look on page 19 of your packet, you can see an overall picture of where we are as far as acquisition of those properties. These, of course, these 4 parcels are 4 of the green ones that you see on here. You can also see on here that there's 3 in red that are very similar to these 4, but they're a part of a subdivision that has not been completed yet, but should be finalized in the next several months. So you can see that we're continuing to tick off properties as we move through the progress or through this process. But this resolution again authorizes me to purchase these 4 parcels, and as council likely remembers, the council authorized me to go up to twice the amount of the borough assessed value for these properties. So all of these acquisition costs are at or below that amount.
Thank you, Mr. Ostrander. Any further discussion on resolution number 2020-03? Councilmember Peterkin.
Not that it matters, but were any of them double the amount?
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Peterkin, honestly, off the top of my head, I can't remember if there were. There are some that we are acquiring at double the assessed value, however.
Any further deliberation comments? Seeing none, hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Petty,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Malloy,
Yes.
Councilmember Navar,
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtet,
Yes?
Mayor Gabriel,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterkin,
Of course.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Next, we have item D4, resolution number 2020-04, adopting the City of Kenai Hazard Mitigation Plan. This is brought forward by administration. Pleasure, council. Vice Mayor Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to adopt resolution number 2020-04.
Second?
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to the council on resolution number 2020-04? Thank you. You would please just state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. My name is Bill Dunn, P.O. Box 163, Kenai. I'll be very brief. I just want to encourage the council to adopt the hazard mitigation plan. I think it's a good idea to put the plan together to recognize the totality of the hazards faced. My particular interest is bluff erosion, and not just the part of the bluff that's being addressed by the Corps of Engineers, but the entire bluff. And it's important to me from a perspective as a property owner that entire hazard is recognized in the plan. And finally, I'd just like to compliment the team that worked on the putting the plan together. I think they did a very good job. And in particular, I don't see her here tonight, but Jennifer LeMay was very helpful in incorporating public input. So just wanted to give her a kudos. Thank you.
Would you like to take any questions, if anybody has any, Mr. Dunn? Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Not a question, just want to thank you for following the process through. Your comments were, taken into consideration. You can see that they were adopted in the plan, the entire bluff as an erosion issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too. I did notice that when I went through the plan. Then I was actually looking for that and found it up. So,
I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.
any other questions of Mr. Dunn? See none. Thank you. And just for folks to know, since Mr. Dunn brought it up, some of the hazard mitigation planning team consisted of Elizabeth Appleby, who's our city planner, David Ross, who's our police chief, Jeff Tucker, our fire chief, Jeremiah Hamilton, who's our fire marshal, Bob Frady's Parks and Recreation director, Mary Bonrat, Kenai Municipal Airport director, Scott Curtin, Public Works director, Jennifer LeMay, PEPMP, mitigation planner, Rick Dombrowski, State of Alaska, PDM project manager, and Brent Nichols, State of Alaska hazard mitigation officer. So that was the team that put this together. Is there anybody else from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-04? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Deliberation from council. Comments?
Question unanimous consent, if it wasn't already asked for. Is this
Just
a
a quick
resolution,
question.
right?
I see Mr. Glendenning's.
Yeah, just object for a question. I'm not objecting to the,
Okay.
how often do we upgrade or refer new information to the hazard mitigation plan? Are we on a 5-year or a 10-year cycle? What are we obligated to do?
Mr. Oshner.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Councilmember Glendenning, I'll defer to our planner in the back of the room, and she can answer your question.
Ms. Appleby.
I don't think this one is plugged in. It's 5 years. So in order to make an approved plan with FEMA, it has to be updated every 5 years. So the next update would be, I guess that would be 2024. We're going to 2019 for this one.
Just
Councilman Glendenning.
since we're on a radio show, I'll ask one more question. What is the benefit to the city for having a hazard mitigation plan?
Ms. Appleby.
Councilor Glendenning, the benefit is we're eligible to apply for a search pool of grant monies that we would not otherwise. So it makes us eligible to apply for grants for hazards before they happen rather than only afterwards.
Thank you, very informative.
Any other questions, comments? Councilmember Peterkin.
I looked this over briefly, but our main priority in here is our bluff erosion at this point.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from council? I believe unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2020-04 is adopted. We're on item D5, resolution number 2020-05, supporting Alaska House Bill 198, an act relating to aggravating factors considered at sentencing. This is brought forward by Vice Mayor Malloy and Councilmember Navarre. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Navarre.
Yes, I'd move for the adoption of resolution 2020-05.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2020-05? Please come forward. We'll just go one at a time. If you would just state your name and record, or name and address for the record, please.
My name is Tammy Willis. My home is actually in Sterling, but I'm currently living at 949 East Poppy Lane in Sodaltna. The reason why I'm living in Sodaltna is because my home in Sterling is not safe for me, since I was assaulted there on December 9th following a series of harassing incidences prior to that. I had a note left on my truck that had a lot of gay slurs and threats, and I had a rock thrown at my window with the word dyke on it. things escalated on the 9th to violence, which left me with 20 staples holding my arm together, as well as 2 stitches in my chest. The reason why I'm here today is because I want to thank Vice Mayor Malloy and Councilmember Navarre for putting forth this resolution. HB 198 is a really, really important piece of legislation for me because Alaska does not include sexual orientation or gender identity in its version of the hate crime laws or as aggravators. I really had no recourse. Luckily, the FBI has stepped in under the Matthew Shepard Act and is pursuing my case or investigating my case under the guidance of the hate crime statutes for the federal government. This legislation will actually kind of bring Alaska more into line with the federal laws regarding hate crimes. It's an important piece of legislation because, as we heard at the town hall meeting on January 4th, there are a lot of other people who have faced harassment, bullying, violence because of their sexual orientation and their gender identity. For the life of me, I don't know why every other class was included in the list of aggravators but sexual orientation and gender identity. But we are the population of people that is facing the most violence and the most hate right now. It's grown tremendously over the last 3 years, and it's being definitely felt here on the peninsula as well. So this is an important piece of legislation, and your resolution means a lot to us in the LGBTQ community because it shows that this is a community that's not going to tolerate the hate and is going to stand beside us and behind us as we kind of move forward and contribute to the community as a large. So thank you guys for taking this up. It takes a lot of courage to pursue this. It takes a lot of courage to put it forth as a resolution. And I want to just acknowledge that and show how much I appreciate you guys standing behind the LGBTQ community. Thank you.
Would you mind taking questions if anybody has any questions? Ms. Wells, I do. When you mentioned you had no recourse, what did you mean by that?
Because sexual orientation and gender identity is not included in the list of aggravators, the troopers and the Soldotna police, both of which are involved in the 3 different incidences, weren't able to even call it a hate crime. They weren't able to pursue it as a hate crime. They weren't able to consider it in that context. The Soldotna police handled the note and the rock, which is what connects this as a, the violence against me as being because of my sexual orientation. And then the troopers are handling the case of the assault. They're not linking those 2 things together. They don't have any recourse or any need to do so because they're not pursuing this as a hate crime investigation. They're pursuing it as a burglary and assault.
But they were still pursuing it. I mean, I guess that's what I wanted to, because you said no recourse, that made me feel like there wasn't any laws
They're
at all.
pursuing it, but the FBI is pursuing it much more vigorously.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilor Naxon.
Yeah, I'm glad you're talking about this because it's the law part that I'm finding kind of, I'm not an attorney, but it's kind of interesting how that does work. It's a federal law, but maybe I'm going to state and ask questions at the same time. It would seem like the state of Alaska, if it's a federal law, they would if that was broken, that they would push that up.
They didn't.
But
the FBI contacted me after seeing the news segments on it.
and the FBI thinks it's a federal law.
Yeah, they feel that the last conversation I had with them, they had moved from the assessment to the actual taking on the case in part because they felt that it rose to the standard of a federal hate crime.
So if I understand how this all works, so the federal government says it's a hate crime, and they're required to, within this federal government law, because it's not state law, the hate crime isn't a state requirement. It's not in there. I understand the statute. So the federal government isn't doing its job because they say it's a hate crime and they're just letting the state do.
No, the FBI is involved and they're investigating it. And they're cooperating and collaborating with the troopers and the Soldotna police. I'm not a law enforcement person and I'm not a lawyer. I'm just the victim here. And where I've educated myself is how I've educated myself as a victim to know what was going on. The FBI, under the Matthew Shepard Act, if they feel that a case rises to the standard of a federal hate crime, they can step in and essentially take the lead or take over the investigation, which is what the FBI is doing here. They're doing this because it was not reported to them as a potential hate crime, or they weren't asked by law enforcement to look into it as a hate crime. They're doing it because they saw me on the news, and they requested all of the reports and the evidence from the troopers and the Sedalton Police, and based on that assessment, decided that it did rise to the level of a federal hate crime. The problem with not having a state statute that includes sexual orientation and gender identity, it includes race, religion, sex, national origin, family history, ancestry. I mean, it includes everything, like 20-some things, but it doesn't include sexual orientation or gender identity. Consequently, when a hate crime occurs towards someone in the LGBTQ community, whether the troopers or the Sedalton Police or anybody actually looks into it and considers it a hate crime, it's not being reported to the FBI. So it's not being included in the FBI statistics. So we don't have any real numbers of what the hate crime rate is in Alaska against people who, based on their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So by adding this to the law, it's doing two things. One, it's giving law enforcement and is giving the district attorneys and so forth the opportunity to consider the aggravators as they relate to a crime committed against someone specifically because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. But it also gives the FBI the ability to take Alaska statistics and incorporate it into the federal statistics. Right now, they can't do that because Alaska does not count sexual orientation or gender identity as any kind of version of a hate crime. So we're not being counted at all in terms of that. The FBI, like I said, they got involved based on news, not based on law enforcement contacting them. If they had, it might be a different story, but right now, what happened to me is not being considered a hate crime here in the state of Alaska. And that's what HB 198 would do, is it would give me and people based on their sexual orientation and their gender identity, the opportunity to be added to those statistics, but then also to be able to see that law enforcement, that the community, that city council and so forth are standing behind us and is not going to tolerate hate towards people based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. And I would also point out that this law would also include heterosexuals, because that is a sexual orientation. I would also include that it would apply to people who are cisgender, because that is a gender identity. So it's not, while these are terms we tend to use mostly in the LGBTQ community or to refer to the LGBTQ community, this also will be applied to everyone equally. So if somebody went after you because you're a male and they hate males, this would still apply in terms of the hate crime aspect. Sorry if I stole that from you.
So, just as kind of, I'm going to follow up on what Mr. Knox said. So this is what we're considering this evening is that would the way I understand it would be added to the aggravator factor of our state statute. So, and would allow for additional a harsher sentence maybe.
Yes.
But what does this do regarding how law enforcement? What would that change from what you experienced with the passage of, if this had been enacted already?
Right now,
And this, I was just, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I was just speaking of just the investigative part of the component of it.
well, for the investigative part, it would require the FBI or require state, I would hope it would require, I can't, like I said, I'm not an attorney and I'm not law enforcement, I'm not FBI. So you're kind of asking me to answer some questions that are beyond the scope of my experience and my expertise. But my understanding is that it would encourage law enforcement to report these statistics to the FBI. Whether they actually had the FBI step in to do the investigation or not is a different story. What it would also do is it would keep the perpetrators off the street longer so that people like me would feel safe longer. The other part of the problem is that because this has risen to the level of a federal hate crime, the person who did this, when they're apprehended, is going to go to federal court, and they're going to, found guilty, they're going to be spending their time in a federal penitentiary. They're not going to be here in Alaska. They're going to be shipped out, which may be the better thing because that means they're going to get a harsher sentence. They're going to be out of the state. There's a chance that they might not return, and I can live a safe and happy life. Right now, I'm still living in the residence hall that's locked 24/7 and has cameras everywhere because 2 months later, it's still not safe for me to go home. If this person's caught And under Alaska's hate crime, they would get a longer sentence, which means I have longer to be able to live here and feel safe. It's not something I have felt in many months. And there is a lot of comfort knowing that if this passes and this bill goes through, that somebody's going to go away for a long time and allow me to feel safe in my community again. So sorry for getting emotional. It's hard talking about this time and time again, but I'm determined to go to every city council. I'm determined to go to every opportunity there is to testify to get this bill passed. Because people like me shouldn't have to live in fear just because of who we are. Nobody else is required to live in fear because of who they are. And there's no laws in Alaska that protect me from discrimination. There's no laws in Alaska that protects me from hate. There's no laws in Alaska that protect me from violence because of who I am. And I love living here in Alaska. I've been here for 7 years, and I can't imagine living anywhere else. I just want to be safe like everybody else. That's all I'm asking for. And that's why this resolution means so much to me. Because it has affected me personally, and it has affected a large number of people that I know that live on the Kenai Peninsula and live across Alaska. We can do more as a community, and this is the first big step to doing more as a community. And it sends a message to me that we're welcomed here, that we're accepted, we're tolerated, and that nobody believes that regardless of what you think about sexual orientation or gender identity, that nobody deserves to be treated with violence or hate, that everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And that's what this resolution is telling me, if it passes, that you as a community want to treat me and want to see everybody treated with dignity and respect. And for me, that's what my expertise comes down to.
And I can agree with Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I'm very sorry what happened to you, by the way, and I hope that you can feel safe someday. I really, truly do. At what point would it be appropriate for us to ask our police chief some questions?
I think
Or our
so.
lawyer? Because I got some questions if these things happen in our town, what we would do.
I guess if it was specific to testimony that was given, that would be, but after, yeah.
Okay,
Unless
thank
it
you.
was- Okay, any other questions? Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Not a question, just appreciate very much you coming in and speaking tonight. And you talk about courage, took a lot of courage for you to do that. Appreciate it. And the only other comment I would have is that, you know, if HB 198 passes, then, you know, it would be, for state crimes, it would be an aggravator. So, you know, it wouldn't require people to be sent to federal prison because it would be in state court. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just, if you don't mind, I have another follow-up question. That I was just curious, it sounded like there was an incident in December and there was some previous, you know, sort of a buildup or apparently some harassment prior to that. You said you've lived here 7 years. Can you tell me about the experience prior to this incident here?
Up until a couple years ago, nobody seemed to care that I was out and I was open. People didn't seem to notice, didn't seem to mind, just treated me like anybody else. But over the last few years, it's become increasingly uncomfortable. It's become increasingly, at times, hostile, and at times a bit aggressive. We've seen it kind of start down in Homer and work its way up. But the specifics of what has actually happened in a relatively short period of time. On November 14th, I found a note on my truck that was full of gay slurs, and basically it called me a dumbass dyke and told me to take my gay shit elsewhere, I was going to be hurt. A week later, on December 22nd, I was on the road driving, and a rock smashed my windshield as I was driving. I later learned that the rock that smashed my windshield had the word dyke on it. Both those cases were handled by the Sedaltna police. Things escalated on December 9th when I opened my door to see if my power went out in my house, and I opened the door to see if my neighbor's power went out as well, and somebody pushed me back into the garage and proceeded to beat the crap out of me with a knife and with his fists. I have my scars. I was bruised from basically here down to my knee as well. It took almost a month for those bruises to go away, and the scars are going to be with me forever.
Well, and I'm sorry to hear that. In this community, I agree with what you said. Nobody deserves to be assaulted unprovoked due to a bias. I can agree with you 100% on that. Especially, I live in this community. I love this community. I love the people in this community, and absolutely don't think that everybody should be respected. So I agree with you on that point. I would ask you just if you said that you want, we pass this, that you would feel safe here. If this doesn't pass by this council or this body, do you feel like you would still feel safe here in the city of Kenai?
I'm not going to feel safe here as long as this person's out there.
Okay.
So it's kind of.
Well, I guess that was sort of I guess it was a general question. Yeah.
If when this person is caught and is sentenced and goes to jail, I will feel safe because that person's locked behind in a place where they can't get to me instead of me being locked behind locked doors. This, as an aggravator, if this is considered an aggravator, then he would have gotten a longer sentence, which means there would be a longer period of time where I could be out and about and not feel like I'm under threat by this person. At some point, this person is going to get back out on the streets, but hopefully at that point, he'll have forgot his hatred for me, or he will have mended his ways or received some sort of rehabilitation in jail or whatever. But during that time that he's in prison, I would be safe. And the longer he would stay in prison, the longer I would be safe, is my logic. And granted, my logic is very muddied right now with a lot of emotion and a lot of unresolved trauma that I'm still trying to work through, but I would like to feel safe again. And I won't as long as he's out there. And I won't when he comes back out of prison either.
Yeah, and hopefully there's some resolution to this for you. Obviously, but I guess I was just kind of diving a little bit further. That assuming he was caught, this individual, that if this isn't passed tonight, would you feel that the city of Kenai isn't welcoming based on that?
I recognize that the issue of sexual orientation and gender identity carries with it a lot of strong opinions, and I'm not here to change anybody's opinion about that. I don't think any of us want to speak to that. I think what we're looking for is the understanding that the city council, the Alaska State Legislature, all of the people that are involved in the passage of this 198 recognize that everybody has a right to be treated with dignity and respect, and that not all of us are treated that way. So that's the message that we're hoping you'll send, is that everybody has this right to be treated with respect and dignity, and that you're going to be the leaders in helping the community resolve that conflict. It doesn't matter whether you agree with my sexual orientation. It doesn't matter if you agree with someone's gender identity. It really doesn't. We can disagree and be fine with that. But when it infringes upon my rights as a human being, and infringes upon my livelihood, infringes upon my health and well-being, a line's got to be drawn somewhere. And I'm really hoping that you guys will draw that line here for the city of Kenai and send that message up to the state and ask the state to draw that line as well.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the council? Comments? Thank you for your testimony.
My name is Audrey Gifford. Can I get my mailing address? Because I was told not to give out my
Sure, yeah, that would be
residential,
fine.
because, as an advocate, I am
Oh,
sensitive as well,
definitely,
and I want to
okay.
protect my family.
Sure.
So my mailing address is P.O. Box 68, Kenai, Alaska, 99611. I'd like to offer my sincere gratitude to Vice Mayor Malloy and Councilman Navarre for showing up at the town hall that we hosted, and for proposing this resolution. Seeing your guys' faces at that town hall made me feel really good that the city of Kenai had representation there. So I was born and raised in Kenai, and while some of my more notable family members have moved away, I chose to stay and raise my family here because I love it here. I love our values. I love the way we look out for each other. I would love the way we're connected. In Alaska, 3.7% of the population identifies as LGBTQ. Now, nationally, it's about 4.5, but here in Alaska, people say about 3.7. So, in the city of Kenai, our population is 7,790. So that means we have about 288 LGBTQ members living in this city. Sexual orientation ranks as the third highest motivator for hate crime incidents, race being first, religion being second. Both of those are covered by Alaska hate crime protections. Sexual orientation and gender identity are not. I'm asking you today to unanimously approve the resolution in support of House Bill 198. In doing so, you will show the over 280 LGBT members of this city that you support their safety and protection. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you mind taking any questions, Ms. Kefford? And I think you're referencing your grandmother, who was our previous mayor, so a nice shout out. Yeah, appreciate the subtlety there. Is there anybody? Please come forward, just, and your address is fine, or your mailing address. Yeah.
Well, they're one and the same. I am Leslie Bird, and I do also currently reside at the dorms at 949 East Poplar Lane. I run the dorms, I supervise the LGBT Alliance. I'm one of the Safe Zone trainers for the area, as well as one of the Pride in the Park leadership members. So I get a lot of feedback from private citizens and who are probably not included in that 3.7% because they're terrified. That number that Audrey read out is likely only the folks who are comfortable being out and sharing information. Tammy kind of took a little bit of thunder off my page, but I'll read it, and then I've got a couple other things to share with you. This is by no means an anti-discrimination act, but it is a step in the right direction, the closest thing that Alaska has to hate crime laws. I've heard many people arguing that this legislation is unnecessary and gives one group special treatment over the others, but it doesn't. Though the added words gender identity and sexual orientation are typically associated with the LGBTQ community, every person on Earth has these characteristics, just as they have sex, age, ability, race, and other protected classes. There's really nothing for anyone to lose in supporting this resolution except for the time it takes to argue it, as well as the perpetrators of these violent acts. Folks might not think this resolution is necessary, but people do act in reflection of their shared values, especially when displayed by their public leaders. Please lead us in a positive and inclusive direction. And then this is an excerpt from another letter that I'd really like to submit to the clerk for the record. In determining the seriousness and appropriate sanctions for many other crimes, the level of intent is a key consideration. Premeditation is deemed to make the crime more egregious, and for such acts, more severe punishments are meted out than for crimes of passion or those occurring due to negligence, even if they have an equal result. For example, state laws provide several levels of homicide. Key factor distinguishing whether homicide is considered negligent homicide, manslaughter, second-degree homicide, or first-degree homicide is the state of mind of the offender, even though in each case the offender caused the unlawful death of another person. This relates to that. Some folks don't think we should list all of these protected classes in our sentencing laws or hate crime legislation. And ultimately, that would be great, but we're not there yet as a country. We're not there where we can say race doesn't exist, gender doesn't exist, and everyone's the same. Once we get there, none of these laws will be necessary, but until we do get there, they're absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Ms. Bond, is it?
Bird?
Bird, I'm sorry. Is there any questions of Ms. Bird? Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, and it might be, not for you. I was just curious if you knew if the federal one listed it specifically or not that is pursuing the other lady.
I'm not really sure if the federal lists gender identity and sexual
No,
orientation.
maybe.
Well, in addition to that, though, I do know that the Supreme Court started debating in October of whether or not the Civil Rights Act would apply to LGBTQ workers. So, just so you know, someone like Tammy can be out and married on Saturday and fired on Monday. So they're not.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, 607 Frontage Road. So I hadn't planned on speaking,
What was your name?
April.
April, okay.
So unlike Tammy, I am not as out as everyone else. I am a pastor here in Kenai who just moved 7,000 miles from Virginia so that she could be safe because she is a pastor at your church right across the road. And tomorrow, if the people in Virginia knew that I was here serving in that capacity, I would be fired because of the job that I hold. And so while Tammy has courage to be out and to be who she is, me and my wife still do not feel comfortable here holding hands or being seen in public or our child going to the middle school and being bullied. And so I pray that while she has the courage and the rest of us are still trying to figure out how this happens after 20 years of trying to figure out who I am, that the people here who are married and have normal relationships, that ours are not normal and that we do get talked about. And when you can't even tell your own mother because of the hate that she has and your family has, it's a hate crime. And nobody will ever know what that is unless they are LGBTQ. And when you are called lesbian or gay or dyke or trans or whatever, those are very derogatory, and I hate that. And as a pastor, I have to look at everyone as equal. And I pray that soon that my daughter can go and be okay with having two mothers, which being LGBTQ is not something I would wish on my own enemy, because it's hard to be those people. And we are talked about all the time. And it's horrible that I had to move 7,000 miles away from home just to be a pastor because I feel called to that position. And I don't tell people here that that's who I am because I know that there'll be recourse, because I live probably not even a mile from here and my gas line has already been cut since we've been here. So while Tammy has extreme courage for being out, not all of us can be. And those are the reasons that we can't be. And so I pray that this will go in, because unless you are the person standing behind here telling you why this should happen, you really have no clue of the names that we get called, the way we get talked about, and how we are not equal. And so I hope that that will help.
Thank you. Is there any questions of April? Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, I was just curious on, you mentioned your gas line got cut. You live in Kenai and that happened?
Yeah, I live less than a quarter of a mile from here.
So, did you report that?
No, because we didn't know it had been cut until a couple weeks later.
Okay.
We had assumed because the car was like this, but apparently if it's cut right, if you're on a flat surface, it doesn't leak. So until I went back to fill it up to make sure it was leaking, we really didn't know until the mechanic had changed it.
I'm glad you said that, because I was thinking natural gas
That's what
line.
I was thinking.
And
So on our car.
you're on your car, so thank you very much, and thank you.
Ms. Smalley.
Susan Smalley, 105 Linwood Lane. When I came in, I was just kind of profoundly sad, and now I'm just madder than hell. When you listen to these stories about our neighbors, I was been looking up a lot of statistics and stuff, and message crime. I don't know, have you ever heard message crime? Message crime is when her gas line is cut, when Tammy is attacked. It's a message to all of that community that you are not safe in this community. And it's a really powerful, negatively kind of thing, and that's why people are not, it's done by cowards, but that doesn't make it any better if you're the recipient. I've been in this town for 46 years. I'm very proud of it. I heard wonderful things said about our community. They're true. But also a lot of us have had our heads in the sand because everything is beautiful in its own way and everybody's nice to each other and we have spaghetti dinners and Even if I don't like you, I come and serve spaghetti dinner to you because we're all part of the same community. When we had that safety town hall, we stopped counting at 145 because that was the legal limit for that room. And I'm very proud that our two counselors were there. There were 12 elected officials there and a whole lot of people. I'm an ally. I'm heterosexual. I really have not ever been attacked for my sexuality. Don't think it's going to happen. I'm a person of privilege. But to acknowledge that other people and children, I think Tim will speak later to one of the kids who talked about what he gets, what he receives as a young person in our school system, and the kind of climate that has happened. I don't think we created it. I think we just sat back and allowed it. But I do believe that this House Bill 198 is a way to get to a different place. We cannot legislate people's hearts, as Tammy alluded. That's, we can't change their hearts, but we can change people's behavior. And that is good enough as a start. There was, it's like rock, paper, scissors. For her, it was paper, rock, knives. And just to think about that somebody would come to my house because I'm an old white woman and come and beat me up because I was an old white woman and they wanted to make a whole example is terrifying. This is not asking for special privileges. Okay, people can still rail about how they hate this person or how they hate that person or whatever. But when it steps into behaviors, that's where the stuff hits the fan. And it makes a difference. In Soldotna, and maybe Kenai, I'm looking forward to hearing from Chief Ross. Their hands were tied in a lot of ways because it's complicated and all these things don't fit together. So it had to go to the FBI. So I appreciate the fact that it's taken on. Soldotna has supported this resolution. It was introduced last night down in the legislature, and we're going to start having hearings. It doesn't give special rights to anybody. It just ensures that these kind of message crimes, so when I go beat up on Bob because he's a council person, because I want to terrify
An old white male.
An old white male. When I do that there are consequences, and the community has said, we don't accept that here in our city, in our borough, in our state. That's not who we are. It's not who we want to be. So I appreciate the fact that the council is taking this up.
Any questions of Ms. Smolik? Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. Hal was a mentor of mine and my favorite teachers, one of them, alongside Mr. Casimore. But I've lived here for 51 years and you 46. This is the first, other than reading about her in the paper, that I've ever even heard of this here. And do you know of any more? I mean, this lady here with the gas line cuts.
What Tammy said at the safety town hall, which broke my heart, is all these other things that had happened to her along the way, she said, I didn't have any violence until the rock and whatever. All those things that happen that degrade people and name call and make children afraid to go to school, those are all violence. When it got to the knives and the kicking and all that, we can understand that. But it exists here, and I don't think you have your head in the sand. I just think that unless you know somebody, and if people talk about these things, then it's like they're whiners. They're playing the victim. I don't think it's that bad. Nobody's ever come up to me and said, you're a heterosexual woman, you've been married, because it's not in our experience. So I'm not at all saying that you guys have been ignorant or the community's been ignorant. It's just that all those things go on, and especially when you hear about them happening to children, and that's authorized somehow, somewhere in our community, somebody has decided, parents and whatever have decided, it's okay to harass people for things like that. And I don't get it, but it does exist. It's just at a level that this, sadly, Tammy's become a poster child, and I'm sad for her because I'm an ally, but I'm sad for her because that happened. But on the other hand, I am so thrilled when almost 200 people showed up at a meeting about Safety Town Hall, and there were advocates and allies, and we're going to learn how to do better. Because if you say, somebody says a remark that's derogatory, didn't know I knew she was, all that. But you all, there are people in your lives who are gay whether you know it or not. And the idea that you would let somebody say something about somebody else's friend or relative. I'm thrilled that the city is doing this. I just think that if we want to be that bestest city, that this is one way to start. And people will still be able to say it's not taking away anybody's freedom of speech. The pastors can rail about blah, 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 going to hell and all that kind of stuff. That's not going to take away their freedom of speech. And it will put some teeth in this so that when crimes happen, they can be followed through in a process that makes sense. And the response can be fast and efficient. And the victim doesn't have to go around trying to figure out who's in charge of helping me. So, anyway, thank you.
Any other questions of Ms. Smalley? Thank you. Sure, I'll allow it. If there's less, unless council objects, but please come forward.
Sorry again, Leslie Bird. Councilman Peterson, you said that you had never heard of other people going through this. There's a really good reason for that. As soon as Tammy told anybody about what happened to her, she started getting hate. People are terrified to come forward with their stories because of what will happen. The kinds of messages she's gotten on Facebook are just appalling. And they never would have happened if she hadn't come forward and said what happened to her. So most people just choose to hide it and live with it because they don't want to invite other crap into their lives. That's all I have.
Yeah, I just like to comment.
Councilor,
I have a cousin that's gay that grew up in Anchorage, and I had many friends. I went from preschool to graduated Kenai Central High School in 1987, and I had probably a dozen gay friends that I knew around here, and some people teased them and stuff, and some people didn't. But it never got, thank God, to this level. And you know, some of us stuck up for the people, and some of us didn't. I was kind of the guy that always tried to stick up for the people that were getting picked on. And I'm really not convinced that this is enough or going to even help. But I do understand that I'm not blind that people are picking on all sorts of people, whether it be that community or many other different things. And but I appreciate you guys coming forward. I really do.
We're just hoping for a deterrent.
Sure.
thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-04?
My name is Rebecca Heinsberger, and my address is P.O. Box 440, Casilla, Alaska, 99610. Hi. I too really empathize with what you've been through. But I want to point out, I am actually against the passage of this because I think all victims should get equal treatment, equal protection. And to be creating categories of people that deserve, you know, special recognition for what's happened to them, doesn't really seem fair to me because you'd have to add all the victims of all the categories. I myself have been a victim publicly. I've been slugged in the face 3 times, had rocks thrown at my car, had things thrown at me publicly because I took a stand myself. I don't qualify for one of these special categories. I'm a pro-life Christian. So I got things thrown at me. Like I say, I had a complete stranger slug me in the face 3 times. I did get protection from the police and due process of law. I also know there's a whole category of people that have experienced what you have, and I was also one of them at one time, about 20 years ago. I was an abused wife. I had to live in the women's shelter for a while. Thank God there's a place like that to go. I couldn't go home either. And I was afraid of being stalked. And there's hundreds, if not a few thousand women in this community that have been through those kind of things. We've all been, I'm not saying all of us here, but there's a lot of us that have been victimized in one way or another. And to me, to make special categories, you know, you got victimized because you're black or you're LGBT, or where are we going to draw the line? You know, should we say abused women should be a category? Should conservative pro-lifers be a category? Where are we going to draw the line? Who gets special protection? And if we get attacked, those people are going to have extra difficult sentences. I'm just saying we're all American citizens that deserve the protection of the law, and we should all be treated equally, no matter what category we're in. So I am against creating these differences. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Heinsberger? Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to Resolution 2020-05?
My name's Barbara Jedlicki. And are you requesting just a P.O. box? Because I have a physical address.
P.O.'s fine.
I don't have a P.O. box.
That would be fine.
Pardon?
I guess at this point, I mean, that was a good point that I never kind of
okay.
put two and two together. But I guess if you try to live what
Kenai
town you live in, maybe would be.
Okay.
And what was your
Pardon?
last name, Barbara?
Jedlicki. Doesn't end with the A. I'm not related to the Jedlickas.
Okay.
It's,
Okay.
I just came, I just heard about this short notice, and I'm very grieved and saddened by how certain people in our community have been treated and are being treated. But I come from the angle of, I'm a victim, very mistreated, came close to being killed by an ex-husband. I got an order of protection, which was just on paper, gave me a false sense of security when he stalked and came real close to killing me in spite of having that order of protection. And so I'm all for people being protected and being taken care of and protected in our community, wherever we live. And so I'm all for protection and not trying to, I'm concerned about delegating different groups for protection, because to me it seems kind of like a Pandora's box that could really get out of hand. And I work with a number of people who live or who work with me. I work at Hope Community Resources. We have a number of employees there who have an alternative lifestyle than mine, and very well accepted, no problems. We're all considered equals, and we all work to the betterment of the good of the people that we work with disabilities, physical, emotional, and mental. So I'm just concerned about creating a legislation that is going to narrow it down to a certain group of people. I'd like it to be, I want to all people of all races and to be considered safe, and religions. And so that's just kind of where I'm at, because I walked the walk of being a victim also. And it was very scary. I was almost to the point of putting, hiring a man to put iron bars on my lower level of my home that I lived in another state to give me a sense of security. I chose not to do that, but I've worked through what I've been through, and I support others who have been victims.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yes.
Any questions? Councilmember Nexton.
Yeah. Not to get too deep into, your situation, and I don't know. I know that the state statutes has a litany of aggravating factors, depending on the different situation. Was there any one of those that applied to you? I assume that there was a judge involved or something. Was there any kind of aggravating that would have increased the penalty for what happened to you? I was wondering if there's,
I was in error of listening to the perpetrator with his attorney, convincing me that he would never do that again. He was a man of prominent position in the community, and I listened to him and trusted, and I regret doing that. Because if I had pursued the legal aspect, he would have been charged, and he would have done time in jail for what he had done to me. So I'm all for the law, fairly judging and following through with individuals who are perpetrators across all, for people of all of us as a people, as a community, as a group of people. Yeah.
Councilmember Peterkin.
Well, I'd just like to thank you for coming forward and sharing your story with us. And I know all victims, no matter what gender or how it happens, is horrible. And I don't ever want it to happen in any community. And just thank you guys for coming forward. Whether we pass or fail this tonight, I just don't want the city to have people to feel like we're not supporting groups because it may not have anything even to do with that isolated situation. It could be for other reasons. And I just, Kenai cares about people and safety. And Mr. Ross is sitting through this meeting and many of our meetings. I can't remember very many that he hasn't said at. And he runs our police department and he cares. I live in this town and I feel safe as can be. And I think we have an amazing community. I just appreciate you being here and all of you here tonight. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-05? Okay, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming out here and testifying this evening. Would you guys up for a break here before we? Yeah, I figured Jim was. So let's take a 10-minute at ease before we deliberate.
You're on the.
Call our meeting back to order here. Councilmember Glendenning. Well, go ahead. Yeah, Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, for open for discussion. I would invite our city attorney to speak on background to the House Bill 198, if you would, please, sir.
Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendale. I certainly can. I don't know if the sponsors want to speak first or if I can go first. Okay. So the proposed resolution supports House Bill. Get organized here. 198 that adds 2 aggravating factors to Alaska Statute 1255-155. And for matter of background, in Alaska, certain criminal charges have presumptive sentencing guidelines. That means that if a judge finds somebody guilty of a crime, they're not supposed to deviate too much from what the presumptive sentence is. There is a statute that says that a judge can deviate to a maximum sentence or a minimum sentence if certain aggravating factors are found. And right now, there are 36 aggravating factors that are listed, and they include anything from like domestic violence, if the crime was committed against a spouse or a former spouse or a member of a social unit, as well as what's at issue here was the 22nd aggravating factor, and that is that the defendant knowingly directed the conduct constituting the offense at a victim because of the person's race, sex, color, creed, physical or mental disability, ancestry, or national origin. So House Bill 198, that is what this resolution would support, would amend that 22nd aggravating factor by including in that list sexual orientation or gender identity. And that is in line with federal laws that were most recently amended in 2009, which I believe that is what Ms. Willis has stated to you, that she is, the FBI is investigating her crime under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009, which makes it a federal crime, federal hate crime, if somebody willfully causes bodily injury or attempts to do so using a dangerous weapon because of the victim's actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. And that's not the full list, but what the amendments proposed by HB 198 would make Alaska's aggravating sentencing statute more in line with the federal hate crime statute. One thing that, and I hope that you'll ask our police chief, Chief Ross, about a little more, is his relationship with the federal, with the FBI when it comes to this sort of thing. But what the Department of Justice provides is that before the Civil Rights Division prosecutes a hate crime, the Attorney General, the Attorney General designates, must certify in writing that the state does not have jurisdiction, that the state has requested the federal government assume jurisdiction, the verdict or sentence obtained pursuant to the state charges did not demonstratively vindicate the federal interest in eradicating bias-motivated violence, or a prosecution by the United States is in the public interest and necessary to secure substantial justice. I don't know if there's any more specific questions, but that's sort of the background that I understand in the interplay between the state and federal laws.
Did that answer your question, Mr. Glendenning?
Yeah, could you just clarify, go through it one more time? If the state has a similar statute and the specials that are tacked on for aggravating circumstances, does that supersede federal involvement, or can they go in a parallel path, or is one superior to the other?
Mr. Bloom.
Thank you. You know, I don't have a lot of personal experience not being a criminal attorney. I did talk to our District Attorney, Scott Leaders, today, and he said that, you know, it's something that they would work cooperatively with the federal government to figure out. I've also had conversations with our police chief that I understand it's sort of a cooperative relationship, and he might be better able to answer that. I can tell you that our district attorney said he didn't have a lot of experience with it because this is not something that they encounter frequently.
Thank you.
With that, I think we'll go to the sponsors next. Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. I did go to the town hall meeting after reading the article in the paper. And I've lived in Kenai since 1957 and been a member of this community and the whole borough. And I thought, okay, I'll go to the town hall meeting, but I don't see that in our community. I just didn't. I hadn't heard about it that much. I mean, sure, there was some, but I didn't see the harm and the hurt that was being caused in our communities by hatred. And I didn't grow up in the early South, you know, when segregation and blacks were fighting for their rights, and you couldn't ride the bus and you couldn't use the water fountain. I remember my dad, when I first saw the first black person in the city of Kenai, he says to me, and I was only probably 6 at the time, he said, "They're no different than you or me. Their skin's just a little darker, but they're no different than you and me." And I'm proud to say that we elected a homecoming queen at our high school year in 1973. And people loved her, and that's part of where I came from. If I saw some of the hurt or the thing, I didn't. There was always people that I saw in the early days where people were saying, geez, that person's marrying a black person, or that. They just didn't feel comfortable with it. And over time, things have changed. But that doesn't mean the hurt and the harm that those people lived with in going through that. And so by going to the town hall meeting, even though I thought, well, I don't believe our community's that way. I don't believe there's the harm, but you know, our community goes wider than just the city of Kenai or the city of Soldotna or even the Kenai Peninsula Borough. And it's the people that spoke at that town hall meeting, some of them have been here all their life, some of them had come from other parts of the country. And it wasn't to me a rally of that. I almost said to myself afterwards, I said, I honestly think those people felt safer than they've ever been in that group and being able to talk. You know, when you hold stuff in and you don't communicate, that's where you hurt the most inside. And if you get an opportunity to speak and just let it out, it helps you deal with it. It's sort of like you've heard the thing, it gets it off your chest. So anyway, I listened and I heard people just telling their story from their heart and talking about the things that happened to them and talking about how they had to leave and they couldn't tell their family and they just had to leave. And these are people that are 60 years old and, you know, that. And some that were only 30 and they still had that fear of if they communicate to somebody, then harm would come to them or they would lose their comfort zone of their own family, so they had to make some choices. But if you listen to them, they just told a wide range of stories. They weren't there. I didn't hear them saying, you got to support this and you got to do this and that to all the elected officials that were there. They didn't come up to you and bang you and say, you got to support, are you going to support this? Are you going to do that? They didn't. They talked. They just communicated. And it was great. And about, I would say 2/3 of the way through, maybe a halfway through, there was a young man from a high school in our communities. His first name was Keegan. And boy, let me tell you, he spoke from his heart, and he communicated real fear that he had at times. And nothing against the school district. He told the story that when he was followed, him and his friends, and they had to run and hide, and people, other kids were targeting them and making them in fear of just being themselves. And even though it happened outside the school grounds, they went to people that they thought were somebody that would, a resource that would help them. They went to the teachers and the principal. And essentially they were told, there's nothing we can do. It's outside school responsibility. Our responsibility we don't get to go outside that and deal with those issues. And in some senses that was sad to hear. And I certainly am not speaking down to principals and teachers because, as some of you know, I was on the school board and we have a tremendous teaching staff and administrative staff that works in those schools and supports kids and advocates for kids in a number of sense. But there is a uncomfortability level that some people still have about gay and lesbian, and I'm sorry I mess up on the acronym of all the letters, but they have a, so you can imagine if us that still have some prejudice or uncomfortability, or our religion sometimes makes us think, is this okay? If I support this, somehow I'm going along with it, or I'm going to be associated with these people. Well, let me tell you, as human beings and all of us living in and working in a community, we're already part of everybody. And so whether you like it or not, and you hear stories, people say, I knew a person in high school, I knew a person at work, I knew this, I knew, like it gets them off the hook. But at the same time, they say, I don't want to belong. I don't want to support you. I don't want to give you extra protection or extra recognition. And in this particular case, this isn't what they asked for is special recognition. They only asked for equal representation in the law and everything else. And until our lawmakers make a new law, if they keep adding aggravators, and that isn't the way to go, then let's deal with that. But don't deny today the aggravator to the sexual orientation class just because, well, it all should be changed. Because I have an uncomfortability voting for this under that name. Somehow it's pulling the strings the wrong way. So I can only ask you that if you talk about the uncomfortability we have sometimes of thinking, well, I'm going to support this, and what are people going to think about that, and what are that? Think about what this class of people go to, even if it only is 3.7% of the city of Kenai's population, what those people go through, the uncomfortability that they have. And we all talk about tolerance, we all talk about equality, we all talk about whatever. Well, this is a time, until there's another change or another bill that we can support some other way. But right now, today's the day that we support and show support for this class and this aggregator, because there's real people. And for that young high school student and all of the other high school students that have been, they don't have a vote, but they had a voice. And when I was at that town hall meeting, I heard that voice. And I'm motivated. Matter of fact, I came into the city manager's office and I said, will you find out from the Kenai Police Department what they do, what they know about this? Have they ever with a resource officer? Soldotna doesn't normally have a resource officers in the school. We used to. We're trying to find the funds or allocate some again, but it's been a very good resource in a number of fronts. But I also wanted to know if they've had the training or some type of thing. I knew at the town hall meeting they talked about the SAFE class or the opportunity to do it. I wanted to know, could one of our officers go to that, or do they get training? What do they get at the academy? You know, what's changed? What can we do as a community? Because I didn't want in our high schools, especially with the young kids in our community, whether they're in middle school or high school or any age in school, not having a resource or somebody, if they went to somebody of authority like the police department, that they would get a response. They wouldn't say, nothing I can do. I don't want that, and I don't want our city. And that's why I say, if you're trying to find a reason not to vote for this, you probably can. You can say, well, they don't do this, they don't do that, or whatever. But let me tell you, this is all that's on the books right now. And this just allows this, and we're making a step in the right direction. And maybe the legislature, there's some talk there that they're going to rework it and do things. Maybe it'll make more people comfortable being able to vote for the same exact thing. It's just the way it's worded. Well, I don't care how it's worded. I want it to be fair and equitable for everybody. And I went to that town hall meeting, and I heard people's hearts talk. And that's why I reacted. And that's why I asked for your vote tonight in support of this resolution. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I attended the town hall meeting also, and you know, like every time I'm at a public meeting or tonight, a lot of new information, learn a lot, and I want to thank everybody who came and commented on the resolution tonight, because again, a really excellent public testimony and learned more information that helps inform me in supporting, you know, the resolution tonight. I also want to recognize Susan Smalley, who talked to us tonight and was the chair of that meeting that had, you know, no more than 145 people at it. Was attended by elected officials and law enforcement officials and a lot of people, the public, including a lot of people from the city of Kenai. I also want to recognize some of the co-sponsors of HB 198 that we didn't mention in our resolution, Representative Gary Knapp, Representatives Hopkins, Christ Hopkins, Sponholz, and Tuck, and thank them for agreeing to be co-sponsor with Representative Josephson. You know, for me, this is also an issue of public safety. And when I was at the meeting, you know, the testimony part by the community of the LGBTQ and the allies, you know, hour and a half, hour 45 minutes. So Councilmember Navarre had to leave because he had other appointments before the elected officials got to speak, and so I assured him that I wouldn't commit him to anything, you know, in public. But I do appreciate his commitment to working with me on the drafting of the resolution and the supporting memorandum. Very good to work together. A lot of great ideas shared. What I did talk about at the time was how the city of Kenai supported public safety, and we had spaces in Kenai that we felt were open to everyone, and we wanted people to feel safe there, and particularly we did that through, you know, funding our public safety, you know, police department and fire department, and then also making sure that like the library is a safe place for people, parks and things of that nature. You know, and I know from having sat in the seat for a long time that maybe too long, some people might think, but anyway, that our police department has a good relationship, a cooperative relationship with a lot of other police departments, and including the FBI. You know, and like we're fortunate that we have a very low level of murder, for example, but you know we have good cooperation, and you know our chief of courts is much more qualified than me to speak of that, or like with Nikiski that helped us, you know, with their dive team and retrieving a murder weapon out of the river. So public safety is important to me. We kind of adapted the definition that's in our resolution of a hate crime from the FBI's website. So that's where that came from, where it says that a hate crime may be defined as a criminal offense against a person or property motivated in whole or part by an offender's bias against the victim's race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. And as the city attorney explained, what this resolution is doing is supporting a bill that would add gender or gender identity to protections as aggravating factors. So it's not narrowing the categories. What it's doing is it's an expansion of protection rights to add to people like for victims of domestic violence that's already there. So for me, it's kind of like it's important for the city of Kenai, just like my colleague said, who you know spoke more eloquently than I'm able to, that what's really important is the last whereas. That criminal offenses motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against the victim's sexual orientation or gender identity have no place in our community. That's a really important policy statement for me. And like you pointed out, like others, I have nieces and nephews, you know, who are lesbian or gay, and they don't live in our community. But if they did, you know, I just wouldn't want them to go through what Ms. Willis did. So, enough said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Malloy. Any other comments? Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what Mr. Ross, our police chief, has to say. What if somebody threw a rock at a window in our town and it had a name on it like that? Would that rise to a hate crime with us, or would we just tell them that no big deal or whatever?
Chief Ross.
Through the mayor, Councilman Peterkin, well, I guess that's a kind of a broad question. I would say, you know, every victim is what the police department exists for, the current victims and those that we can prevent from being victims. So we would take that case just like many other cases that are violent or extreme and investigate that to the full extent we could. There's not a hate crime statute in Alaska that makes that a particular crime because it's hate driven. You know, it's an aggravator like you guys have been talking about. The crime would be criminal mischief or assault or another statute under Alaska statute that we could charge that person with, the crime they committed against the victim. So I guess our part in that being a hate crime would be to make sure we passed on to the prosecutor if we're aware that there's a protected class or an aggravator involved, you know, if it had to do with their race or if this were to pass had to do with their sexual orientation and it became an aggravator. It could also be a federal crime based on it being a hate crime already under the statute. So it's not uncommon for our folks, our investigators, our officers to communicate with the FBI. We have on many cases discussed cases with them and gotten their involvement from murders to sex crimes to other crimes. We don't encounter this type of hate crime we're discussing tonight very frequently. It's pretty infrequent in my history at the department. along with officers having that direct connection with the other agencies. I myself, as a chief, meet with the heads of all the other agencies on the peninsula on a regular basis, including the local head of the FBI in Anchorage and the DEA and the Homeland Security. So we're a small law enforcement community. We do discuss cases that overlap between jurisdictions and where we can help each other out, and anomaly cases where somebody else might bring resources to bear. I mean, that's commonly our involvement with the FBI, is where they can bring resources to bear, or they can prosecute something that is not readily available under Alaska statute. That was a long-winded answer. I don't know if I got to what you were looking for.
Oh, that helped me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? No one's got anything else to say? Oh, Councilmember next then.
I don't know if I have that much to add, and I do appreciate everybody that's come here. And, you know, in my life, I think everybody has the right to be happy, and that's just something that I live with, and it really doesn't matter what their orientation is, one way or the other. It's just that part of me. I'm a pretty conservative guy. Otherwise, and maybe that's my unconservative side, but that's just how I choose to think. When I look at the change that the state is including in their code, it seems like it falls short in providing, you know, what I think a lot of the folks here want, at least now. Perhaps it's a first step in going into that direction, because I don't see where it provides any real additional safety, you know, as far as the court. It does as far as the court goes. Maybe they can add some additional time onto somebody's sentence or whatnot, but I think the crime remains the same, particularly since the state doesn't have a hate crime statute as it is right now. It just doesn't exist. I really don't see that adding sexual orientation or gender identity is providing special treatment to any one group, considering there's, I think, as the city attorney said, 31, what was the term? Aggravating considerations already within that statute. If they're not covered here, they're covered somewhere else, and this isn't covered anywhere else. So I don't see the harm in it. I think that maybe it's a first step. It's not nearly as far as it perhaps needs to be for those of you that testified today to get to where I think you want to be. So. Perhaps you know, going to the state legislature and going somewhere farther is what needs to be done. But I don't see any reason to oppose this suggestion to the state to make the modification.
Any further discussion from council? Councilmember Glendenning. You turn your mic on.
There we go. Yeah, I too have similar thoughts to that of Councilman Naxted, having emigrated from Chicago 50 years ago. There was quite a bit of hate and violence going on as a result of political and sociological activities of the 60s. But thinking back to when I was just a little boy, I was right during World War II, and I can remember my mom talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and talking about there was 4 freedoms, and freedom from want is one, but freedom from fear was the one that perhaps would attain status that would arise, in my mind anyway, of something that we could speak to tonight. It's perhaps a basic precept of American life, that we should be in America as we live, as we live with each other. These are things that we should hold near and dear to our heart. And Chief Ross and our attorney Scott explained what this House Bill 198 does. In reality, we have heartfelt testimony from our testifiers here and from the presenters of the resolution. I take all these comments very, very, very seriously, and we should not have a significant segment of our population living in fear or even have. I'll just leave it there. Anyway, I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Any further discussion, comments? Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. I just want to say that, you know, at this town hall meeting too, there was a lot of church representation there too, and even some preachers. And you know, they really do. There's churches that welcome. They don't judge you. They welcome you, because otherwise you can't communicate. You can't even begin to talk. And in this particular case, all of us unfortunately sit up here as elected officials, and sometimes the news gets it wrong because you vote one way and they say, oh, it got voted down, or it this, and so therefore they're not. I think this time it's that important that we vote strong and we vote to say no. If somebody came up to you and say, why did you support that? Say, we support everybody and everything, and there was no reason. Even the testimony tonight, there was no testimony saying these people don't need to be protected or there doesn't. There was just a question of how you do it. And that's what I don't want to get missed between the words here, or what we're doing today, is all we're doing is sending a resolution to the state of Alaska to say we're in support of you making Alaska part of the federal aggregators that have an impact in our state, and that in turn reflects back to our communities. And if we do that, then we're speaking for our community also, when we're sending a leadership message to the community. It doesn't matter who you are. And as most of you know me, I stand up for the homeless. I stand up for everyone. I don't pick and choose. Whether it be domestic violence, whether it be all kinds of things. You have to find solutions to the hatred and the things that drive people to that. And just keep in mind too about the aggravator. The only reason, it's almost like, you know, a lot of people do, as the chief said, you get charged with criminal mischief or that. And sometimes that's done not premeditated at all. But if you look at hate crimes in general, the person is built up, and sometimes they've unfortunately got it from their parents, and they've passed that hatred on to the next generation and the next generation. And that's where we have to stop and say, no more. We're going to support everybody, and we have to send that message clear as a leadership statement from this council to our community, that everybody's equal and tolerance is important. Thank you.
Any further discussion? You know, this was an issue that when I saw this on our agenda, I just, you know, I kind of cringed a little bit, because I wondered if this is something that we should debate at a local level. This is something that's a state statute, and it's and by the testimony tonight, we can even the advocates for this have sort of recognized that it's a divisive issue. It's something that people struggle with. I've been struggling with this, and I'll, not because I don't think that that maybe there is an issue here. That I'd like to believe there isn't. I mean, I've lived in this community for 50 over 50 years myself, and quite honestly, and I have friends that are gay, and I'm sure I've got some that I don't realize that are gay, as was mentioned earlier. They're still friends of mine. I still value their friendship. And this is a passionate issue from both sides. There's folks here that think that by moving this forward, we're basically, I don't think it's necessarily stamp of approval on the gay community, but more as I was speaking and during the break, as a matter of human nature, that someone's getting something. That maybe I'm being discriminated, right or wrong, that I'm being discriminated against because they're getting something that I don't. When you look at equal protections under the law, I think everybody has the right to be treated equally and with respect. Everybody in this community should feel safe. Anybody in this community that is assaulted should have the protection of the police and their perpetrator or assailant prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, regardless. This is, I want to view this as a safe city. I love this city. I love the people in this city. I don't care if you're gay. I don't care if you're black. I can't think of too many enemies that I have in this city. One of the things that I've thought about in like I said, is I've gone through to progress my thought process regarding this of, where am I ending up here? Is we have the part of this law that I agree with is the assault on someone unprovoked assault based on a bias. That's wrong. It's wrong on a lot of levels, and I can't. I'm not going to. When I think about things like people that are and it's getting worse, and I think it's getting worse in this country with the political climate we see nationally. We turn on the news now, and instead of peaceful protests somewhere, there's people beating on each other, and it's both sides of the fence, because we can't seem to have a civil debate that it's always got to be, you got to do this my way or it's not acceptable. And I'm not saying the case there. So what? I mean, I talked to our city attorney about this. This is a specific to House Bill 198, which precludes us from changing it drastically to the point that it won't resemble what it was, or amending it without prior notice. My personal feeling is that I would like to see a resolution from the city that addresses something along the lines of unprovoked assault based on a bias. That to me could be an aggravator, that because it's not something that person did or they're doing to some. It's simply out of that is hate, and I think that's something for me that encompasses more of the community. And I'm not trying to take anything away, and I don't want to be viewed as somebody that doesn't think that the gay and trans community in this area should feel less safe. I think it's a way for us to extend that to other people that might be under this, and I think that's part of the issue. There's a lot of protected people that are protected, but there's some people that may not be, based on a random attack or even a premeditated attack based on something that they put up on Facebook or commented on or went to a rally or something like that. you know, so as you probably imagine, I'm struggling with this for a variety of reasons. So with that, I'll just leave it at that and ask if there's any other comments from council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I just wanted to note that we did receive 3 public comments that we added to the packet from Toby Burke and Kim Howard and Michelle Vasquez. And I wanted to thank them for their input into what we're doing tonight too. And I recognize what you're saying, and I've had the privilege of serving with you for a long time. Definitely respect you, and your comments are always thoughtful, and appreciate that. And you know, I would just encourage you to support this resolution tonight, because it goes towards what you're talking about. And like I said, for me, it's a lot of this is an issue of public safety. You know, public safety in our community, and we do want everyone to feel safe. And I agree with you there. And if there was another resolution, you know, that had to do more generally with support of, you know, you know, sentences, stronger sentences for aggravated crimes. Certainly, I would support that. You know, when that would be in front of us. So, thank you very much for your comments, and I hope you'll support this too. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Malloy. And just so you know, I did asked our city attorney to draft an amendment as a separate whereas to put in here, but I don't know if it's appropriate, if it's something that should just come back as a separate resolution, but
Do you want to take an at ease to consider that?
Well, I'll listen to Councilmember Peter can add his light on.
Well, I agree with Mayor Gabriel. I don't judge anybody. And I feel horrible what's happened, and but I don't support this, and it nothing to do with you personally or any of the situations that were raised, and I appreciate both sides of this, but please do not take it as, I know if the press gets hold of this, please don't take it as the wrong way, because I love Kenai. I was born and raised here, and I don't see where this is going to help. I heard Mr. Ross and everybody we have a good relationship with the feds. This would go right to them, and I just don't feel where, I don't think any of them should be separate. I think we should have different legislation altogether. So don't take my no vote as we don't welcome you in our town or anything like that, because that's not what it is at all. So.
Any further discussion on the resolution number 2020-05? I'm sorry, Councilmember Petty.
It is most regrettable that these egregious acts are perpetrated on our fellow citizens here. And I want to thank you for your courage to come before so many people publicly. I can tell you that when I first saw this resolution, I was going, you know, I want to promote unity and inclusion in my community, but it felt as if this resolution was bringing forth division. And there are passionate arguments for both sides. A wise man stated, everyone is made equal by the hand of our Almighty God, which I completely agree with. Every human that is privileged to be here is equal in the sight of God. However, regrettably, not everyone treats their neighbor fairly and with respect and with dignity. I wished I had all the answers and that, that everyone would feel like that they were equal. And so I know that there is an injustice and not everything is perfect. And so I will be supporting this to help remedy challenges that community members face with trying to live peacefully here and that are perpetrated through hate. So that ends my comments. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Yes.
Councilmember Navarre.
Yes.
Councilmember Naxtet.
Yes?
Mayor Gabriel.
No.
Councilmember Peterkin.
No.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yes.
Councilmember Petty.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you all for coming out and testifying this evening. I appreciate that. Next up, we have resolution number 2020-06, designating the investment and allocation plan for the city's permanent funds and establishing appropriate benchmarks to measure performance for calendar year 2020. Sponsored by administration. Pleasure, council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you. Mayor Gabriel, move to adopt resolution number 2020-06.
Second?
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-06? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm like Councilmember Glendenning. I forgot to turn my.
Oh, no problem.
But I will speak to it. We had a discussion that was related to this when we had our presentation, from Ms. Nicolai this evening, and of course that a lot of that discussion is going to be continuing because what we're doing tonight with this, as my understanding is, we're adopting allocation that's the same asset allocation as we did last year where we had the really good year. And the whole thing about 5-year average and whatever will be something that we'll talk about in the future. There'll maybe another ordinance relating to that, I guess, at our next packet for introduction. So long-winded way of saying I support this.
Very good. Any other discussion? Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, did we need a second? Or it's all second?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's-
I didn't hear that either.
All right, so anyway, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, because I thought I went to a public
Maybe it
hearing.
was.
Okay.
Did I go to public?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, I'm prepared to support this resolution, and Terry gave us a heads up on the discussion to come, and full steam ahead on this. Thank you.
Councilmember Navarre.
Yeah, I want to thank Terry Eubanks, and our city should, those of you in the audience tonight, if you haven't, we have a very good finance director. And I appreciate his memorandum to us on this, and it's an annual thing, but you got a double whammy today on a couple things. So, but Terry, thank you very much for the job you do for the citizens of the city of Kenai and keep us.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilmember Peterkin.
So this is the one where we're leaving it the same as last year? And, can I ask Terry a question?
Yes.
Terry, I hear you say we might do a little changing on this, maybe?
Mr. Eubank.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Peterkin. This is, what we're doing here, this is determining what we're allowed to buy and in what, what amounts. And this also establishes how or what benchmarks or what we will use to evaluate the performance of the portfolio. The only difference between this and last year is and I'm not sure what page this is, it's page 242 of your packet. It's the last It starts performance measurement of cash allocation will be measured against the target weighting using the Citigroup 90-day T-bill index as a benchmark. That's the only change from this resolution from last year. And honestly, that was just omitted last year. It's nothing new. That's what we've been using to evaluate the cash portion of the portfolio. What will be separate legislation is completely separate from this. This is how we're going to invest the money and how we're going to evaluate it. What will be coming back to you is how we will distribute from the earnings and when and why and how. Probably going to propose an amendment to that. But, you know, this is a key to our performance, and this is really important, I think, because this represents the city's commitment to a long-term investment strategy. And this really is something we shouldn't be tweaking a whole lot very often. And it's very consistent to what we've done since '08 when we started this.
And this is what you would recommend us to do?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I guess we could have just led with that one. Any other discussion on the, on resolution number 2020-06? See none, I just want to.
Unanimous consent?
Unanimous consent is requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2020-06 is adopted. And just wanted to, again, echo council's comments and thank Terry for his hard work on this. Next, we have item D7, which is a laydown by myself. It's resolution number 2020-07. This was time, and I apologize for this. This was time sensitive. We got the board of fish will be meeting this Friday. What's that? Oh, I was wondering. The question I had for our clerk, should I read it before it gets moved?
You can, or I have 10 copies here if people want to read it.
Okay, I was just thinking for the folks on the out in Cyberland there. So I wanted to read it just so if it's something, just to make sure it's something you would like to move, because I think everybody should have that option. So this is resolution number 2020-07, sponsored by myself. And on that note, if council is agreeable to all sign it unanimously, that would be acceptable to me or any other co-sponsors that want to jump on board. A resolution of the Council of the City of Kenai, Alaska, supporting sound fisheries management practices and diversified harvest opportunities in the Cook Inlet. That is the title. Whereas the City of Kenai has benefited from healthy, well-managed salmon runs as an essential part of its economy and quality of life for its citizens and visitors for over 100 years. And whereas all user groups in the City of Kenai, sport, personal use, subsistence, and commercial benefit from healthy, sustainable salmon runs to the Kenai River, and whereas sport fishing is a significant part of the city's local economy and contributes to a high quality of life for many residents and visitors, and whereas personal use salmon fisheries are important to many city residents and visitors for the harvest of salmon for their families, and whereas subsistence salmon fishing is of critical importance to rural residents and native groups in our area, not only for their harvest of salmon, but for the cultural significance of the fishery. And whereas the Cook Inlet commercial salmon industry is a key component of the city's local economy because it provides jobs, is a reliable tax base on both real and personal property, and puts salmon on the plates of Alaskans that can't or choose not to fish for salmon themselves. And whereas adoption of regulations that are based on anything other than sound research-based biology result in long-term and perhaps irreversible damage to our local economy, its residents, and to the resource itself. And whereas a well-managed fishery based on sound research-based biology is intended to achieve the maximum sustained yield, and whereas a fishery that is managed for maximum sustained yield consistently provides the highest possible number of returning salmon and the greatest opportunity for all user groups, maximizing the benefit of the fisheries resource to the people of the state, a constitutional obligation of the state of Alaska. Now therefore be resolved by the Council of the City of Kenai, Alaska, Section 1, that the City Kenai City Council supports sound fisheries management practices in Cook Inlet, specifically with respect to the Kenai River salmon runs. And section 2, that the Kenai City Council respectfully requests the State of Alaska Board of Fisheries to recognize the historical and economic significance of the salmon runs that return to the Kenai River by avoiding adoption of regulations that are not based on sound research-based biology. And section 3, that this resolution takes effect immediately upon passage. Section 4, that upon passage, a copy of this resolution shall be forwarded to Governor Mike Dunleavy, Alaska Department of Fish and Game Commissioner Doug Vincent Lang, Alaska Board of Fisheries members individually, Senator Peter Mchicki, Senator Gary Stevens, Representative Gary Knopp, Representative Ben Carpenter, and Representative Sarah Vance, passed by the City Council, Council of the City of Kenai, Alaska, this 5th day of February 2020. So I guess I would now entertain a motion to approve. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Move to adopt resolution number 2020-07.
I'd second it.
Is there any discussion? I do, as I was reading through this, and I want to thank our city manager for bringing this together, but as I was reading through this, I did see one thing that I would probably entertain an amendment on, is in the 1, 2, 3, 4th whereas, where it says personal use salmon fisheries are important to many city residents, and strike and visitors, because personal use salmon fishing is not open to non-residents. Councilmember Nixon.
Before we did that, perhaps visitors could be somebody from Anchorage, since they're not city residents?
Okay, well, if we can make I think it might be confusing if we'd say Alaska visitor or resident visitors, maybe. Something along those lines, I would entertain a motion. I was just trying to get some clarity to that. Councilmember Glendenning.
Could the term Alaska residents be used, referring to the PU fishery?
I think what we're trying to, I think what Mr., and I mean, I don't want to speak for Mr. Ostrander, but I think what he's trying to capture here, that visitors coming to allow, so you put Alaska resident visitors, maybe, with that. I mean, I guess I could ask Mr. Ostrander his opinion on it. Mr. Ostrander?
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. The thought was that it was important to our city residents, but also to visitors to our city. And of course, with the personal use fishery, the only ones that are allowed to participate are state residents. There could be some clarity. At the moment, I'm not certain what the exact right language would be there, but we could clarify that to make it clear. Certainly, the folks that would be reading this resolution are, I'm sure, aware that only Alaska residents are the only visitors that would be allowed to utilize the personal use fishery, but we could clarify.
Or to put some along the lines, I would probably entertain to many city residents and Alaska state visitors. Was there a motion to amend?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There we go. Thank you.
My suggestion would be to strike the word visitors and replace that with other Alaska residents.
There you go.
So it would read, personal use salmon fisheries are important to many city residents and other Alaska residents for the harvest of salmon for their families.
Second.
Very good.
Request unanimous consent.
Thank you. Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, we have this resolution number 2020-06 moved and seconded. Is there anybody, did I go to the public yet on that? Huh? 07. Do I need to go to the public? Okay. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2020-07? Seeing no one as amended, seeing no one, bring it back to council. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I support this resolution. Generally, I would object to a laydown on such a complicated topic, but this is consistent with resolutions that the city's already passed in past years, you know, supporting sound fisheries management practices and diversified harvest opportunities. I like how you've expanded it a little bit from previous resolutions that we've supported, and as you pointed out, there's a short timeline. So it's kind of like, you know, this is an ongoing dialogue with the Board of Fish, you know, every year. So this is consistent with that. So for that, you know, I do support it, and I don't have a problem with it being a lay down because it's you know, just expanded on what we've told them in the past. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, Vice Mayor Malloy. And just for a little bit of clarity here too, with I know the city manager will be up there to testify. It's something, and I'll be there also. But I thought it was important if we testify that we have some, you know, basically confirmation, validation from the council about what we're going to as a type of testimony we give. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Also, I'd be willing to, you know, sign it too,
thank
if you want to have, if it's unanimously adopted and everyone wants to sign it, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the resolution number 2020-07? Vice or Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. In the section 4, I'd like to add after, in parentheses, individually, put Kenai Peninsula legislators, and then they list their name. And then after Vance, add, and also forward a copy to all other state legislators for, if you wanted to add, I guess we could end it there instead of for their information. But I think it's important to recognize, you know, our legislators and the other names that you did. But I would like to see that all legislators, we make sure they get a copy of this resolution. So however, maybe Scott or somebody can help me with that last one, or if it worked, you can maybe repeat it to me. I think that might have worked.
I heard that we're amending section 4, that upon passage, a copy of this resolution shall be forwarded to Governor Mike Dunleavy, Alaska Department of Fish and Game Commissioner Doug Vincent Lang, Alaska Board of Fisheries members individually, Kenai Peninsula legislators, Senator Peter Machicki, Senator Gary Stevens, Representative Gary Knopf, Representative Ben Carpenter, Representative Sarah Vance, and all other state legislators individually.
Second?
Mr. Bloom seems happy with that, so any discussion on the amendment? Thank you for that, Councilmember Navarre. Any other discussion on the amendment?
Request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. Any objection? Seeing none, the amendment passes. Any other discussion on resolution number 2020-07? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Navarre.
I would request unanimous consent and that all names be added to the resolution and signed before we leave tonight.
I'll second.
Very good. Unanimous consent was requested with all signatures. Are there any objection from the body? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you, Council, for that. So, resolution number 2020-07 is adopted as amended. Next, that brings us to new business G7, action approval, mayoral nomination for appointment to the Airport Commission. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Nackstead. You're the airport guy. I always go to you on airport stuff, so you're.
Well, I'm not on it anymore, but.
Yeah, but you're still
I
applying.
was taxing on it today.
Yeah.
But I move the nominee, Derek Litchlighter, for the Airport Commission.
Second, request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, Derek Leachlighter is now appointed to the Airport Commission. Thank you, Council. That brings us to Commission Committee reports. Council on Aging.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. The meeting coming up, scheduled for this month, has been canceled. The next meeting will be in, where are we at here? March the 12th of 2020. Just a note for everybody's calendar is that the March for Meals will be happening, I believe it's on the Friday, the 20th of March, 2020. And please circle that on your calendar. It's something that in the past we have well supported.
Yeah, March 20. And,
20th, I was told. March 20th.
Can't be the 20th because that's
It's a Friday.
March the 20th.
Could you verify and just could you blast that out to council once you get confirmation, Ms. Hines? Thank you. I always like the invites because I just have to hit one button and it's populated. So thanks for that. Any other? Are you don't? You got more for your report?
No, the meeting was canceled, and we have a meeting coming up in March, and I just wanted to highlight the March for Meals, and that ends my report.
Okay. I was just wondering, your light was still on, Mr. Glendinning, so I just, okay.
I have tinfoil in my pocket.
Airport Commission.
Thank you. Their last meeting was January 9th. I missed the opportunity to report on the 15th because I was out of town, but they had a short meeting, but they're keeping up to date on the changes in the airport, and they asked questions. We were over with the city manager today with wondering if, at the time, the little plug-ins and UPS boards for tables for people to plug in their cell phones and computers and work. It's my understanding we're going to continue, and we'll probably have something in front of us as far as some additional equipment or lobby furniture kind of improvements. But they're real positive, and they're just as anxious as everybody else to get the ceiling in, the siding on the side of the airport. And their next meeting is February 13th. Thank you.
Thank you. Harbor Commission?
Yes, we're meeting here on the 10th, next Monday, and the Coast Guard will be here, so if anybody wants to come and share what they have to say about, they're going to have I believe, the petty officers and a couple of people here to just talk about how things went last summer and what they plan on doing next summer, so that's kind of exciting. And that's what I have, so I hope to see somebody here.
Thank you. Parks and Recreation Commission?
Parks and Recreation Commission meets here tomorrow night, 6 p.m., so I'll be back.
Thank you. Planning and Zoning Commission?
Planning and Zoning Commission met on January 22nd. Thank you. See, you can even forget to turn it on, and some of the members forget to turn it off, so we've got it all balanced out here. So, Planning and Zoning met on January 22nd, and they had two public hearings, two items that we talked about tonight. A resolution recommending to the council to adopt ordinance 3102-2020. That was the public hearings for Planning and Zoning. Advertisement. Item 2 was Resolution PZ 2020-02, recommending the City Council adopt the City of Kenai Hazard Mitigation Plan. And finally, under new business, they discussed the 2020 Alaska Planning Conference that is coming up. Actually, it'll be February 9th, which is today, I think. Not quite, 5th. But so February 9th through 11th, 2020. In Anchorage, there's at least 5 planning and zoning commissioners that'll be there for that training. And their next meeting is February 12th. Mr. Glendenning happened to be in the audience, and I pointed out that it looked like they hadn't had a meeting for a couple of months, but I won't be able to meet their next 2 meetings, the 2 in February, and he offered to do that with all of his time that's available since he's not doing Council on Aging because they canceled their meeting. So thank you very much. That's
Beautification Committee?
Beautification Committee met on January the 14th and are making plans to make Kenai beautiful, and our next opportunity to meet will be on April the 14th.
Thank you. Mini Grant Steering Committee, we had no meeting, there's no report. Under report of the mayor, I've just got a few things I'd like to report. I did attend Joanna Hoyer's service last Saturday at the senior center, and you know, sad. It was sad day. It was a good turnout, and as far as you know, celebration of life goes, it was nice to see the attendance there and the folks that were sharing, and she'll be missed. Very kind of the old guard of the city of Kenai, and a true pioneer. And so, sadly, you know, it's one of those things I don't, it seems like we're doing more of those every year with the older Kenai residents, and it's not very pleasant. Monday evening, I attended the Kenai Peninsula School District, the school board, Kenai Peninsula District School Board, hosted an informal dinner before their meeting on Monday, and Matt Morse was here just a minute ago. He's on the school district. I was hoping he would stick around because there was some outreach there. It was informal, sort of like a little round table. They were interested to wonder if the city of Kenai would be, or council would be interesting in having them come over here and present on things that are going on with the school board. And Mr. Ostrander was there also. I thought it was a good idea. They gave us an overview of the budget and that they're looking at in the bond, that their proposal that they're going to put out there. And by all accounts, it sounds like things are going to be a lot less contentious, I guess, this year than where it was last year. So that was good to hear. I understand, I was talking to Ms. Smalley before the meeting, and Herb Steller's, oh, did you have something on that?
Well, no,
Okay. Oh, very good, thank you. Yeah, and so she gave me some information at his service, so it sounds like it'll be the 14th, the 15th, the Saturday 15th. Okay, thank you. So if we could blast that one out too, that'd be appreciated.
Which one was that one? I got it. I will.
Yeah, she's got, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And I just wanted to, and as I mentioned earlier, I'll be at the Board of Fish here. I'll be up there through this weekend. I'm going to probably look at what the committee meetings are looking like for the roadmap for next week. Possibly take off work a day or two if I need to attend those. So I'm not really sure exactly what my schedule is going to be at. So I'll give you a report when I get back. I think Mr. Ostrander is going to be testifying on Sunday afternoon or sometime Sunday. There's a few proposals in there that going to affect the city of Kenai. So we're still kind of working on some that we might want to identify and address. So we'll give you a report of what we testified to, so you'll have an idea. If any constituents asked, you'll know what was there. And then I just wanted to close by saying that I appreciated the debate tonight. This wasn't one of our more comfortable. I think most of the council up here probably struggled with the resolution, but I just wanted to say I hope things work out for you, Ms. Willis, and they are able to get some resolution, so you'll feel safer in our community. I truly mean that. And with that, we'll move to administration reports. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I'll start out with the Board of Fish. As the mayor stated, I'm planning on attending the Board of Fish starting on Sunday, and depending on how things roll out over the course of the week, potentially parts of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or even Thursday. I'm hoping to stick with just one of those 4 days. I'm trying to maximize my time there as much as possible, but I wanted to ask the approval of council actually to speak up on behalf of the city on a couple of things specifically. There's a proposal, let me make sure I have it in front of me here. There's two proposals specifically that I think obviously impact the city, and based on actions of the council over the past 3 years, they're obviously ones that we should comment on. I really tried to avoid some of the more controversial allocative type proposals because I think it's much more difficult to weigh in on those without specific direction from council on exactly how you'd want me to weigh in. But these two proposals, I think specifically, are obvious. The first one is Proposal 85, and Proposal 85 is a very short proposal actually, but it basically outlaws fishing derbies on quantified stocks where fish do not spawn. So, where they spawn. So derbies would only be allowed on waters where fish do not spawn. So that would preclude us from being able to conduct our derby. I just received the permit from Parks actually today, so that was one of the proposals that I'd like to speak to. I don't think it actually has a lot of traction, but I still think it's important that we speak up. And the second one is Proposal 145, which would extend personal use fishing on the Kenai River until August 15th. There's some obvious impacts to the city there, the cost of the city, impacts to the residents by expanding it beyond what it is now. And it's also, we have the ability right now to shift resources and responsibilities a little bit during that 3-week period and essentially pull people off from their duties and allow, maybe push some responsibilities off for a few weeks. But if you extend that even longer, it becomes much more difficult for us to do that. So that's another one that I'd like to speak to specifically. And then the third thing is essentially any other proposals of interest, I'll track certainly, but if there are proposals that seem to counter specifically the resolution that you passed tonight, I'd also like the ability to speak to those, at least generally, that the city would like to continue to see the Board of Fish make their decisions based on sound biological reasons. So those are the three categories that I'd like to get approval of council, and I guess this is I'm asking you to comment, or if you have any concerns or suggestions before I do that, I'd like to hear it tonight.
I'd move at this time to direct the city manager and the mayor to testify on behalf of the city of Kenai on those two specific topics, as well as others that might impact the city of Kenai.
Second, and
I'll second it.
Sounds like we could have a second, maybe with unanimous consent. If
I have
that's
a
possible.
question.
And I'd like to discuss them.
Sure.
Discussion,
Let's
please.
open up for discussion. Let's start with Councilmember Glendenny.
Yeah, explain that bit about the derby again, please.
Mr. Ostrander.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, Councilmember Glendenny. So Proposal 85 would limit, the exact language is limit the prosecution of fishing derbies as follows. Derbies should be prosecuted on quantified stocks where fish do not spawn in times of abundance. So it's saying that derbies would only be allowed, they're using the term prosecuted, but derbies would only be allowed on stocks where fish do not spawn. So in this case, obviously, the coho salmon that are part of our silver salmon derby are anadromous fish that are going up the Kenai River to spawn. Therefore, you would not be allowed to prosecute or conduct a derby on that stock. So that's, if Proposal 85 were passed by the Board of Fish, it would preclude us from being able to have our derby.
Yeah, just a question. It's my understanding that they don't manage that fishery all that tight. Especially the second run of silvers is just kind of there. I don't know if that impacts how you view this, this proposal, but I'd like to see our fishing derby, but if you believe holistically that, we should not sponsor it if a stock is in danger, which sometimes the second run is, then just probably listen and let your conscience be your guide. That would be my thought. Thank you.
Councilmember Peterkin.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the resolution and all, but my opinion is that it's just, that's your job, Paul, is to advocate for our river and anything in our city that would affect us. So, carry on.
Vice Mayor Malloy.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Yeah, wow, the 101 or whatever it was, the one on having the open personal use to August 15, obviously an unfunded mandate that would be, so definitely, and the other one support this. The only thing that I would have a question on is, well, first let me say that I appreciate the mayor, especially taking his vacation time to go up to represent the city on this, and you've done that for ever since you've been mayor and before, and so I want to thank you for doing that. I'm just a little hesitant at a part about directing you to testify on all these subjects when you maybe can't be up there for some of them or whatever. So I guess I would do that with the understanding that it's kind of in your judgment.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree. Obviously, if there's no need for me to be there, then it's not going to work. But I still, if there's an interest, because the way if you've never been to a Board of Fish meeting, it's sort of a windy road with how they end up from a proposal to either a vote up or down on it. It's not they take testimony, read them, and hit them. They go into committee by group, and then they're discussed there, and then as committee as a whole, and it's a bit involved. So
Request unanimous consent.
unanimous consent is requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. A couple other things on the city manager report. I did meet with Nate Berga and Norm Darch last week. You may recall that last year they had the first annual first return or the first salmon, or what they're calling it now is the return of the red. So basically it's an early season celebration of the first commercially caught fish in the city. And this year, rather than having it at the Packstar location, I've told Nate and Norm that we'd like to expand that and actually do it on the city dock site. We're pretty excited about it. We got Parks and Rec involved. Nate and his group they're standing up a website. They're going to look to bring some vendors on site as well. They're going to have salmon there. They're going to donate the salmon, so it's going to be a giant salmon bake. They're going to have some sides, and last year they had potato salad and some other things. But all of the proceeds from it will benefit the food bank. So essentially, when you show up there, there's going to be a suggested donation, but you can certainly give a lot more. You go up there, you get your freshly barbecued salmon and your sides, and we're looking to turn it into basically a celebration, a giant party. What else is going to be there this year? I don't really know. We're hoping to turn this into a giant festival, essentially, every year, celebrating the start of the summer, the beginning of the salmon run, all of that kind of wrapped into one. So really excited to see where this goes this year, but it is going to be bigger and better than last year, and it will be at the city dock. Also want to let council know that we've continued to work. Actually, Terry and I primarily been continuing to work on.
Do you have a tentative date for that celebration, or is it yet to be determined?
There's an actual date. I believe it's June 5th. It's the first Saturday in June. June 6th. June 6th.
Can we put something on our website for it, or our DipNet app or something?
Mr. O'Sullivan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we will promote it as much as we can in the city. We're still kind of waiting until we figure out exactly what this thing looks like before we start pushing it too hard. But yeah, we're going to definitely get it out on our website. Parks and Rec is going to promote it. Could be a possible thing that our marketer could promote as well. I know that Packstar and others are going to promote it. So really want to grow it as much as we possibly can.
And just out of curiosity, did anybody go to that last year? Paul and I went to it, and it was fantastic. It was unbelievable. And that's where we kind of thought, like, there should be more promotion anyway. Weather was beautiful. It was on their waterfront anyway. Sorry.
Did you say the 5th or the 6th?
6th. June 6th. Yes. Saturday, June 6th, the first Saturday in June. On to less exciting things, but certainly important. Terry and I have been continuing to work on the fleet replacement plan. I told you that we had a fleet of 55, and we're trying to get that reduced and then capitalize it in a way that we can continue to replace vehicles and keep our fleet new and safe for our employees. We have reduced the fleet now from 55 to 42. I'd like to thank the department heads for all the work that they did there to try to figure out how we can better utilize our fleet, provide the same level of service, but with fewer vehicles that we have to replace long term. Council will be seeing more on that in the very near future. Also, we've just started working on the new airline operating agreement renegotiation. May have told council that we negotiated that for 1 year last year because of the airport terminal rehab project. This next airline operating agreement will be for a much longer term, and it's an important part of our airport to continue to operate in the black moving forward. On top of that, the fire training center, as you know, is under construction, and the facility management agreement for that facility needs to be renegotiated as well. Beacon has been in that facility for a number of years, and now that we've upgraded the facility, it's going to be a state-of-the-art facility. We will be renewing that facility management agreement. Administration has also been working on the capital improvement plan. We have established, so basically a 5-year capital improvement plan. I am going to schedule a work session similar to what we did with the marketing plan at the last meeting. So like a 5 o'clock work session to introduce that to council, the 5-year capital plan. Based on that discussion, council may decide that they want to schedule additional work session or discussion at some later time. But I've talked to Jamie about scheduling that for the next meeting so we can introduce that on the 19th. Latest on the Bluff project, I'm actually meeting with the Alaska District folks, teleconference on February 12th, so I believe that's next Wednesday, to discuss the next steps after review by the Office of Management and Budget in D.C. I talked to our congressional delegation about the review by the OMB. It's slightly delayed from what our anticipated decision of February 6th. I'm hoping for a decision on February 11th. I do believe that we'll have a lot more clarity by the time we have our next meeting on February 19th than we do now. And that's what I'm shooting for, both at the meeting with the Alaska District and then with further discussions with our congressional delegation. And with that, that's the end of my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of the city manager? Seeing none. We'll move to City Attorney, Mr. Boone.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Members of council, I have nothing to report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of the City Attorney? Seeing none, we'll move to the City Clerk, Ms. Hines.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, members of council. I will be out of the office next week. I'll be attending Laserfish training so that we have more than one person in this building that knows how to do workflows and efficiencies for the software. And also wanted to report that the clerks of the Kenai Peninsula, I don't know how else to put it, all of the clerks, the Peninsula Borough Clerk, the clerks from the cities of Homer, Seward, Soldotna, Kenai, Ketchimek City, and Seldovia have all been meeting, discussing the next steps for the recommendation that the election stakeholder group made. And the Kenai Peninsula Borough has entered into a contract with Dennis Wheeler. I can't remember the name of his company now. He used to be the municipal attorney for the municipality of Anchorage. But he worked with the municipality of Anchorage in their conversion to the hybrid vote by mail process. So he's doing a feasibility study for the borough, and we expect a report back early March, and we will meet again and report back on his findings of that. And that is all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Any questions of the city clerk? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Hines. That brings us to item K, additional public comment. Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to address the council at this time? Mr. Bannock?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. Thank you for a meeting tonight. It was fun to be here as well. Speaking of fun, if there is no objection from the mayor or the council, I'd like to suggest just a little bit of fun for about the next 35 seconds. And if I could have a little bit of audience participation as well, you would stand and sing with me, Happy Birthday to Henry Nackstead, just for fun.
Do I have to stand too?
No, you do not. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Henry. Happy birthday to you. Thank you. Thank you.
So you stuck around all meeting for that. I noticed.
I just wanted to, Leslie Bird again, I just wanted to thank you all, every single one of you, no matter which way you voted, for your sincere discussions in tonight's resolution about House Bill 198. I also am going to submit my contact information to the clerk and invite you all to our Safe Zone training on February the 8th. It is from 2 to 5 p.m. It's open to the public, but we are also able to do private Safe Zone training, and I'll explain what that is briefly. Private training for groups who are either unable to attend on the 8th or would prefer to just have members of their community, whether it's a church or a business or this council or whoever, and it's free. It's 2 to 3 hours depending on your wants, and it is just to teach more about the LGBT culture. What do all these words mean? What all these letters mean? Why do we use so many? Things like that, and it's just how to be a better ally for LGBTQ folks, and that's really all I have. So.
And where is that at?
It is at the KPC Residence Hall, the student housing, at 949 East Poppy Lane.
Thank you, Leslie. Ms. Freyes?
Hi. Carol Freese, 609 Maple Drive, Kenai. In the last 30-some years, I've taken minutes of meetings. And I promised myself when I retired from Jamie's job that I wouldn't take minutes anymore. I broke that promise because I'm now the secretary of the Kenai Senior Connection Incorporated, which is the host of the pie auction. And I can tell you for sure that the pie auction this year is going to be on March 20th, starting at 5:30 in the afternoon, I believe, is when the country store will open, and at 6, I think, or 6:30, the meal's going to be, or the program will start. So there. Thank you.
Thank you. She also gets roped into doing a council on aging minutes for us, too.
Oh, and I suppose everybody, I think, has been there, but is Mr. Bannock the auctioneer again?
I believe he has said that he would do.
Okay.
So bring
Very-
your money,
Yes.
come hungry, there'll be great food.
And
Great
you
entertainment.
accept cakes too, I find out. I bring them every year. And I think anybody can bake a
Yeah.
pie too. But
Exactly.
Thank you, Ms. Fraze. Anybody else from the general public that'd like to address the council at this time? See none, we'll bring it back and have council comments. Start with Councilmember Petty.
Thank you. It's a privilege to live in this community, and I'm very thankful that I've had the privilege to raise my family here. And I did attend the memorial service for Joanna Hollier, and it was very touching to see all the community members that came out to honor her. Also, another very rich community member passed away, and her memorial service was also on Saturday, and that was the founder and owner of Kenai Fabric, Miss Geneva. And so it was an honor to get to honor her and give my condolences to their family. So look forward to many more wonderful years here in Kenai. And so thank you for all the good work that was done tonight.
Thank you. Councilmember Glendenning.
Yeah, I too went to the Joanna Hollier Memorial over at the Senior Center, and again, I was just impressed by the enthusiasm, the viability, and integrity of our community to come out and support one of our pioneers who was taken from us all too soon, and reminds me of what a pleasure it is to be part of this community, and reinforces the reason why I came to Alaska all those years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Peter again.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Just an honor to live here and a great discussion tonight, and I think we had a good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarre.
Thank you. I too attended Joanne Hollier's celebration of life, and I thought it was very fitting, and it was a lot of great comments from a lot of people. But as I made a comment, I just wanted to thank the first generation of Kenai for what they've did and stuck here and made everything work, and we're better because of it. And as the mayor stated in his, Joanna served almost 30 years on the commission. She also was one of the first residents, or the first residents at Vintage Park. And so I wouldn't do it for just everybody, but because of those statements, I would move at this time that the city tell the family that we'll sponsor a plaque at the. I'm sorry, we already did it.
She's actually purchased several.
Oh, okay. I was going to say if it hadn't been, I wanted to make sure the city recognized that. So, if we did it, I won't do it. But that's how I feel. So I'm glad she did one. Yeah, we can figure out something to recognize her. Maybe over at Vintage Point, maybe call the entrance, but maybe that's something I can bring back.
Sure.
I'll talk to some of our fellow, but only because there, as the mayor said, unfortunately some of this, the first generation is slowly leaving us, but their commitment, and especially with Joanna, I got to see her at Christmas time because Mayor Porter asked me to bring over a poinsettia, and actually it was the day after Thanksgiving because I was still dressed as Santa Claus, and she had just got back from Arizona, and so I delivered it up to her room, and her daughter Linda was there in that, and I have that picture. It's a picture I'll treasure. But she told me in that period of time that I was with her too, she said, this just shows you the homestead spirit and that you can't put out the flame. She said, I went to the doctor with this diagnosis, and they said, go make plans to die. And she said, like hell, I'm going to do that. We're going to fight this thing. We're going to find a way to and move on. And you got to remember, she was 94, 95 years old. So that's why we have what we have here in our community. And so I personally just, from the dais, want to thank her for her service and all the first generation that have made a difference in our community, and it's making it a little easier on a second generation to do it. But thank you, and I guess I know I'm forgetting something, but that'll end my comments for tonight.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm going to be gone at the next meeting because whenever Paul sets up a work session, because I'll be at AML representing the city for the legislative conference in Juneau. So I'll see if I can tie in, or if we do the work session by tie-in, but we'll go from there. But I might miss everything and not be able to call in. But thank you.
Thank you. Just as I'm thinking about it, I'd just like to just make sure, authorize you, one thing about to go ahead and get flowers, please, for the Stellar service. Herb Stellar service on the 15th. And that's on behalf of the city. Vice Mayor Malloy.
Excuse me. Yeah, I just want to say I agree with Councilmember Peterkin. Good meeting tonight. I think we did good work. Other than that, I've already talked enough. Thank you. No other comments.
Councilmember Naxton.
Yeah, I appreciate the big turnout that for Joanna at her celebration of life, and I'm sure she was there watching, and certainly somebody that can never be replaced here. I never thought she'd actually leave. I've known her since she was 35 years old, if you think about it. But she was my godmother, and she was always there. She was very consistent, and so, you know, like what Tim was talking about, doing a plaque. I talked to Gary, you know, and the clerk, and she already had that all organized already and paid for and set up, and you know, so, and it's like that's how she does everything. Everything was organized and whatnot, and that's something I've always appreciated about her. And you know, and I guess we could go on, but I'm still amazed that a young woman, 20 years old, would come from Wisconsin and come to Alaska alone, leaving the family, everything that it's, you know, she's accustomed to, and she ended up in Talkeetna. And Talkeetna is a long ways from here now, and hard to get to, kinda, you know. But then, you know, and then the rest is kind of history as she came down here with Ed, and that speaks volumes of a person, and what they've got behind them, the gumption and all that. So, but anyway, she'll be greatly missed by me.
Thank you. We do not have an executive session this evening or pending items. And just a reminder to have everybody sign the resolution to the Board of Fish before we leave. And seeing no other business before this body, we are adjourned.
Oh, I know, I'm not leaving. I got a daughter whose truck broke down at the start of our meeting. And I've been trying to text her